My name is Ethan. I am 34 years old and my family just drove 14 hours for a 2-week beach vacation at my house. My mother Patricia announced it in the family group chat just days ago Friday. All 20 of us are staying at your beach house for 2 weeks. Have everything ready. My wife Rebecca replied almost immediately. Our daughter Lily is sick with pneumonia. We are keeping her isolated. Please wait until next week. My father Richard chimed in. Nothing is changing. We are already packed. I stared at my phone, the familiar knot of frustration tightening in my chest, and replied with one word. Fine. But when 4 luxury SUVs pulled into my driveway in Destin, Florida, loaded with coolers, beach chairs, and 20 expectant relatives, they found out exactly what fine meant. If you have ever had to deal with entitled family members who ignore your boundaries, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy seeing a family of narcissists get exactly what they deserve. The roar of engines disrupted the quiet afternoon on my street as the convoy of 4 oversized SUVs pulled into the driveway of my beachfront property. I watched them through the security cameras from my home office, my hands resting lightly on my keyboard. Patricia, my mother, was the first out of the lead vehicle. She was dressed in crisp white linen, an oversized sun hat pushed back on her head, already directing the chaotic unloading process with sweeping gestures. Richard, my father, followed closely behind, looking irritated as he struggled with a large cooler. From the second SUV, my older brother Tyler emerged. He was wearing designer sunglasses and a shirt that cost more than a month of groceries, projecting his usual aura of unearned wealth. He was supposed to be a cryptocurrency millionaire, a narrative my parents eagerly maintained, despite the reality being far more complicated. Right beside him was Jasmine, his wife. She already had her phone out, mounted on a selfie stick, broadcasting their arrival to her thousands of followers. Hey guys, we just arrived at the family beach compound in Destin. Jasmine chirped to her audience, tossing her hair over her shoulder. 2 weeks of sun, sand, and luxury. Let us go claim the master suite. The rest of the extended family poured out of the vehicles, uncles, aunts, and cousins, stretching their legs after the long drive. They were laughing and talking loudly, completely ignoring the fact that this was a residential neighborhood and not a hotel parking lot. I remained seated at my desk, my gaze fixed on the monitor. Upstairs, Rebecca was with Lily. Our 3-year-old was finally sleeping, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically beneath the oxygen mask that helped her breathe through the worst of the pneumonia. The doctor had been very clear: strict isolation and rest. No visitors, no stress. I watched as my mother marched up the steps to the wraparound porch, the designated leader of the invasion. She reached the front door and confidently punched the 5-digit code into the electronic keypad. I had given them that code a year ago, back when I still believed we could have normal family visits. The keypad emitted a sharp negative buzz, and the indicator light flashed a solid, unforgiving red. Patricia frowned, adjusting her sunglasses. She punched the numbers in again, harder this time. Again the negative buzz and the red light. Richard, the code is not working, she called out over her shoulder, frustration already seeping into her voice. Tyler, come try this. Ethan probably forgot to update the system. Tyler jogged up the steps, Jasmine trailing right behind him, still live streaming. He punched in the numbers with exaggerated confidence. The door remained firmly locked, the red light glowing mockingly. What is going on? Jasmine asked, turning the camera toward the door. Did Ethan lock us out? Patricia pounded her fist against the heavy mahogany door. Ethan, open this door right now. We have been driving for 14 hours. I leaned forward and pressed the microphone button on my desk console, connecting directly to the Ring doorbell camera outside. The code was changed an hour ago, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the porch, cold and distorted through the small speaker. You have 5 minutes to get off my property. Patricia stumbled back a step, genuinely shocked to hear my voice coming from the device, rather than seeing the door swing open. Ethan, what are you doing? Open this door immediately. I told the entire family we are staying here for 2 weeks. You cannot embarrass Tyler and Jasmine in front of her family. They flew all the way from Atlanta for this. I kept my finger pressed on the microphone button. I told you Lily has pneumonia. She is upstairs on an oxygen machine. We are not having 20 people in this house. I said fine to your message, which meant fine, come all the way down here if you want to waste your gas, but you are not coming inside. Jasmine pushed her way to the front, shoving her phone practically into the doorbell camera. Are you out of your mind? She screamed, her carefully curated influencer persona shattering. What kind of cold-blooded monster are you? My entire family is out here. We flew in from Atlanta. Are you seriously going to throw us out on the street over a little cold? A little cold. Rebecca's voice suddenly cut through the speaker, sharp and trembling with a rage I rarely saw. I turned to see her standing in the doorway of my office, a baby monitor in her hand. She stepped up to the microphone. Our daughter was in the ER 3 days ago because she could not breathe. She is on oxygen. And you brought 20 people here for a vacation. Patricia ignored Rebecca, completely addressing the camera as if speaking only to me. Ethan, stop this nonsense right now. Tyler's firm is going through a very stressful period and he needs this vacation. We all need this vacation. I collected money from everyone for this trip. You are making me look like a fool. You did that yourself, Mom, I replied. You have 3 minutes left. Jasmine was still yelling into her phone, ensuring her followers heard every word of my perceived cruelty. You guys are seeing this, right? My brother-in-law is literally locking us out of the family vacation home. This is unbelievable. We are stranded. As her voice hit a shrill crescendo, the distinct wail of police sirens began to echo down the coastal highway. The sound grew louder, approaching rapidly. Patricia turned around, looking toward the street in confusion. What is that? I released the microphone button and sat back. The sirens grew deafening as 2 local police cruisers turned sharply into my driveway, their lights flashing blue and red against the sunny Florida afternoon, effectively blocking the 4 luxury SUVs from leaving. I had called them 20 minutes ago, reporting a large group of trespassers attempting to access my property. The 5 minutes were up. Patricia spun around her white linen outfit, suddenly looking much less crisp as the flashing red and blue lights painted her face. She stared at the 2 marked cruisers blocking her escape route, then whipped her head back to the camera, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and absolute fury. Are you insane? She screamed, slamming her palms flat against the reinforced glass of my front door. You called the police on your own mother? Open this door immediately, Ethan. You are embarrassing us. Jasmine has family who flew all the way from Atlanta for this trip. Her aunt and uncle are sitting in that 3rd SUV right now watching this. Do you have any idea how this makes Tyler look? I kept my voice deadpan, leaning closer to the microphone on my desk. It makes Tyler look like a man who brought 20 people to a house with a sick toddler without asking. Patricia scoffed loudly, throwing her hands up in the air. It is just a cough. You and Rebecca always overreact to everything. You did the same thing when Tyler borrowed your car for his anniversary trip, and you reported it stolen just because he kept it an extra month. You are ruining your brother's well-deserved break. He has been working so hard on his crypto investments, and he needs to decompress. Lily is not coughing, Mom, I replied, my tone hardening. She has severe pneumonia. She is hooked up to an oxygen machine upstairs. Her lungs are filled with fluid. If she catches whatever airport germs you and 20 strangers just brought onto my porch, she will end up in the pediatric intensive care unit. Again. Patricia actually rolled her eyes at the mention of her granddaughter's hospitalization. Children get sick, Ethan. It builds character. Just keep her locked in her room. The house has 6 bedrooms. There is plenty of space for us. We are staying for 2 weeks, and I'm not having this discussion anymore. Unlock the door so we can get out of this humidity before my hair is ruined. Before I could answer, Tyler pushed past our mother. He puffed out his chest, his face red with indignation, and leaned aggressively into the camera lens. Listen to me, little brother. I am not playing games today. I paid good money for the travel snacks and the gas to get our entire convoy down here. You are going to punch in that override code right now, or I am going to break a window and let us in myself. Try it. I said evenly. The glass is hurricane impact rated, but please give it a shot. I would love to add property damage to the police report the officers are about to file. Aunt Barbara waddled up the front steps using a glossy fashion magazine to shield her head from the blazing Florida sun. Patricia, what on earth is going on? Why are we standing out here in the heat? The kids have been in the car for hours and they need to use the bathroom. I need to get my bags inside. Patricia waved her off, frantically flashing a fake, tight-lipped smile. Everything is fine, Barbara. Ethan is just having one of his episodes. You know how he gets. He always needs to be the center of attention. Patricia turned back to the camera, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. You are making a fool of me, Ethan. I organized this entire trip. I told everyone in the extended family that we had a private beach compound for the reunion. You owe your brother this much after you selfishly refused to invest your savings into his startup. Now let us inside before those officers walk up here. Jasmine realized the situation was not resolving quietly. Her eyes darted from the police cars to the locked door, and she saw a golden opportunity for content. She shoved Tyler aside and positioned her phone right next to the Ring camera. I could see her screen displaying the live feed, the viewer count rapidly climbing by the second. Hey guys, Jasmine said, her voice instantly adopting that fake sympathetic influencer tone she used for apology videos. I need you all to witness this toxicity. We are dealing with a severe narcissist right now. My brother-in-law Ethan is literally refusing to let his own elderly parents and my family out of the dangerous Florida heat. We traveled across state lines to be here for a family bonding experience. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the glass of the camera. Ethan, sweetie, you are live to 40,000 people right now. Do you really want the whole internet to see how you abuse your family? Do you want your employer to see this? Because I will gladly tag the major bank you work for. You are being financially abusive by hoarding this massive property while your family suffers outside. Financial abuse, I repeated, genuinely amused by her ridiculous buzzword salad. Jasmine, you drove here in an $80,000 car wearing designer shoes. Pay for a hotel. That is not the point. She snapped her influencer mask, slipping for a second, before she remembered her audience and forced a pout. The point is family trauma. You are traumatizing us. My followers are already pulling up your LinkedIn profile. Open the door and apologize to your mother, or I am going to make you go viral for all the wrong reasons. Go right ahead, I told her, my voice echoing through the porch speaker. The police are walking up your driveway right now. Make sure you get their good side for your followers. Patricia pushed Jasmine out of the way, panic finally breaking through her entitlement. Ethan, this is your absolute last warning. If you do not tell those officers this is a misunderstanding, I am cutting you out of the family forever. You will not see a single dime of our inheritance. You will be completely alone. I am already alone, Mom, I replied. Except when you need a free vacation or a scapegoat to fund Tyler's lifestyle. The two officers stepped out of their cruisers, adjusting their utility belts, as they assessed the crowd of 20 angry, sunburnt relatives stranded on my lawn. The heavy thud of their boots marching up my paved walkway silenced the murmurs of the extended family. The lead officer, a tall man with a stern expression, stopped at the base of the porch steps. He rested his hand casually on his radio. All right, folks, he announced loudly. We received a call about a group trespassing on private property. Who is in charge here? Patricia and Tyler froze their eyes, darting nervously toward the officers, realizing that my threat was not a bluff, and their supposed family vacation had just become a legal nightmare. Richard smoothed the collar of his pastel polo shirt and stepped forward, adopting the polished, authoritative posture he reserved for intimidating bank tellers and restaurant managers. He completely ignored the panic rippling through Tyler and Patricia. In Richard's mind, money and status were absolute shields against consequence, and he was about to play his favorite card. Officers, thank you for arriving so promptly, Richard said, projecting his voice over the humid afternoon breeze. He extended a hand toward the lead officer, flashing a perfectly practiced country club smile. I am Richard Wilson. This is simply a tragic family misunderstanding. My son Ethan is inside the house. He is unfortunately suffering from a severe mental episode and he has locked us out of our vacation rental. The lead officer, whose name tag read Miller, did not shake Richard's extended hand. Instead, Miller hooked his thumbs into his utility belt, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene. He took in the 4 idling luxury SUVs blocking the driveway, the mountain of expensive luggage piled on the front lawn, and the 20 extended relatives murmuring anxiously among themselves. Finally, his gaze landed on Jasmine, who was still holding her phone high on its selfie stick, narrating the police arrival to her online audience. "Ma'am, step back and keep the walkway clear," Officer Miller instructed Jasmine. Jasmine huffed, offended that her influencer status was not recognized, but she retreated a few steps, dragging a terrified-looking Tyler with her. Richard stepped into the officer's line of sight, demanding his attention back. "As I was saying, officer, my son has a history of these paranoid outbursts. He gets confused and territorial. We flew our entire family down here for a reunion, and now he is having a breakdown inside. We are terribly worried about him. We just need you to assist us in gaining entry so we can get him the psychiatric help he clearly needs." Patricia eagerly jumped in to support the lie, pressing a hand to her chest in a display of mock maternal agony. "It is true, officer. He has been acting erratically for months. He is holding our sick granddaughter hostage in there. He refuses to let her own grandmother comfort her. You have to break the door down before he hurts himself or the baby." Officer Miller exchanged a brief skeptical glance with his partner. Dealing with wealthy tourists claiming domestic disputes was a staple of Florida coastal policing, and they rarely took anyone's word at face value. Miller walked past Richard and marched directly up the porch steps. He inspected the heavy mahogany door, noted the solid red light on the keypad, and leaned close to the ring camera. "Ethan Wilson. This is Officer Miller with the local police department. I am standing on your front porch. I need you to step outside right now so we can sort this out." Inside my office, I watched the high-definition feed of the officer's face. My heart rate remained steady. I had anticipated this exact manipulation from my father. I leaned into the microphone. "Officer Miller, I am not stepping outside," I replied, my voice steady and completely void of the manic energy my parents had just accused me of having. "I am the sole occupant of this property, along with my wife and our 3-year-old daughter. My daughter has been diagnosed with severe pneumonia. She is currently attached to an oxygen concentrator upstairs, and I will not leave her side, nor will I open this door to expose her to a crowd of 20 people." Richard scoffed loudly from the bottom of the steps, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh of pity. "Listen to him, officer. The paranoia is escalating. He is making up medical emergencies to justify locking us out. Please, you have to force the door open. He is completely unstable." "I am perfectly stable, Richard," I countered through the speaker, making sure the officers heard the cold clarity in my tone. "Officer Miller, what you are looking at is a group of 20 individuals who arrived uninvited at my private residence. I informed them in writing 3 days ago that they were not welcome due to my child's severe illness. They ignored that boundary. I have given them ample warning to vacate the premises, and they have refused. I want them removed for trespassing." The second officer standing near the squad car spoke up. "Sir, if this is your family and they have luggage, we have to determine residency rights. Are they guests who have been staying here?" "They have never stayed here," I stated firmly. "They arrived 20 minutes ago. They have no keys, no access codes, and no legal right to be on this property." Patricia let out a shriek of indignation, pointing a manicured finger at the camera. "You ungrateful little liar! I told the entire family we were staying here. We planned this for months. You cannot just cancel a family reunion because you are feeling vindictive. Officer, he is just trying to punish his brother because Tyler is successful and Ethan is jealous. Break the lock." Officer Miller held up a hand to silence Patricia. The chaotic shouting of the relatives was beginning to draw the attention of my neighbors, who were now peering out from their own pristine beachfront porches. Miller turned back to Richard, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Look, sir," Miller said, his voice dropping to a serious, authoritative register. "The man inside is completely coherent. He is claiming this is his private property, and you are trespassing. Unless a crime is actively being committed, or unless you can prove you have a legal right to enter this specific house, I cannot and will not break down a reinforced door over a family argument. I am going to have to ask you and your party to pack up your vehicles and leave the premises." A wave of panicked outrage swept through the crowd of aunts, uncles, and cousins. They had driven for 14 hours. They had spent thousands on gas and travel snacks, all based on Patricia's promise of a free, luxurious beach vacation. The murmurs grew angry, directed entirely at my parents. Richard's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The calm, privileged patriarch facade vanished, replaced by the cornered arrogance of a narcissist losing control of his audience. He realized the police were not going to blindly obey his commands just because he wore a nice watch. He needed leverage, and he had come prepared for an argument, though perhaps not one involving law enforcement. "You want proof, officer?" Richard practically growled, unzipping the front pocket of his expensive leather travel duffel. "You want legal proof that we have a right to be here? Because I have it right here in black and white." Jasmine zoomed her camera in, capturing the dramatic moment as Richard pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers. He snapped them open with a flick of his wrist and shoved them directly into Officer Miller's chest. "That is a legally binding, fully executed short-term rental agreement," Richard declared, a smug, victorious sneer spreading across his face as he stared directly into the Ring camera lens. "We did not just show up, Ethan. We rented this property through the management company for 2 entire weeks. We paid in full. This house is legally ours until the end of the month, and the police are going to enforce our lease." Officer Miller unfolded the paperwork, his eyes scanning the printed text, the official-looking letterhead, and the signatures at the bottom of the page. The tension on the lawn was absolute as 20 relatives held their breath, waiting for the officer to validate their vacation. Inside, I stared at the monitor, my fingers steepled together. I did not use a management company. I had never rented the house out to anyone. Richard had gone to the extreme length of drafting a completely fraudulent rental document just to force his way into my home and maintain his wealthy illusion for the extended family. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought a piece of paper would force the police to break my door down. He was entirely wrong. I watched Officer Miller hold the crisp sheet of paper up to the sunlight filtering through the clouds. Richard stood with his chest puffed out, a satisfied grin plastered across his face. He looked back at my mother, Patricia, who nodded approvingly. They honestly believed this fabricated document was their golden ticket. My father had always relied on the sheer weight of his confidence to bend reality to his will. If he acted like he owned the place, people usually apologized and handed him the keys. That tactic might have worked on a tired hotel concierge, but it was not going to work on local law enforcement. More importantly, it was not going to work on my wife. While Richard spent the next 60 seconds loudly explaining to the officers how much money he had wired to the property management company, I pulled up the encrypted files on my desktop. Rebecca, sitting in the chair next to me with the baby monitor on her lap, leaned over and tapped the screen. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, completely devoid of the intimidation my parents used to instill in her. As a certified public accountant, Rebecca dealt with fraudulent paperwork for breakfast. Seeing my father try to pass off a fake lease on our own house was almost insulting to her professional sensibilities. "Send it to the main dispatch email," Rebecca instructed, her voice low and steady. "Attach the state registration for the LLC, the deed history, and my identification. Let them cross-reference it in real time." I attached the PDF files and hit send. I knew the police dispatch would receive it immediately. Now all we had to do was wait for the radio to squawk. Down on the porch, Richard was still holding court. He turned to face the camera, pointing a finger directly at the lens. "You see, Ethan, you cannot just throw a temper tantrum and cancel a legally binding contract. I do not care what kind of mental breakdown you are experiencing. You are going to let us in, or I will press charges for breach of contract and illegal eviction. I paid $10,000 for this specific fortnight. Your Aunt Barbara paid her share. Everyone here contributed to a luxury experience." Aunt Barbara nodded enthusiastically from the crowd. "We certainly did. We paid your mother directly. Now open the door, Ethan. This heat is unbearable." I remained silent. I let them dig the hole deeper. Jasmine was still holding her phone up, making sure her thousands of viewers caught every word of Richard's self-righteous speech. She occasionally whispered commentary to her audience about how ungrateful some family members could be when dealing with a successful patriarch like Richard. Officer Miller finished scanning the document. He looked at the signature line, then looked at his partner. His partner gave a slight shrug. Miller turned back to Richard. "Sir, what management company did you say you used for this transaction?" Miller asked, his tone carefully neutral. Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Destin Premier Coastal Rentals, top-of-the-line agency. I dealt with their senior broker personally. The funds were wired 3 weeks ago. Now, if you are done playing 20 questions, I would like you to escort my unstable son out of the property so my family can begin our vacation." At that exact moment, the radio on Officer Miller's shoulder buzzed to life. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, crisp and clear enough for everyone on the porch to hear. "Unit 4 dispatch. We just received the verification documents directly from the property owner. The deed is registered to R&E Coastal Holdings, LLC. Sole proprietor is listed as Rebecca Wilson. There is no management company on record for that address. Repeat, the property is not registered as a short-term rental." The silence that fell over my front yard was absolute. The sound of the crashing waves in the distance suddenly seemed deafening. The 20 extended relatives stared at the police officer, then slowly turned their gaze toward Richard and Patricia. Officer Miller casually folded the fake rental agreement in half and handed it back to my father. "This piece of paper is completely worthless, sir." Richard's face drained of color. He looked down at the document as if it had suddenly caught fire. "That is impossible," he stammered, his confident facade shattering in an instant. "There has to be a clerical error. My son Ethan is a low-level data analyst. His wife is just an accountant. They cannot afford a $2 million beachfront compound. They are renting it, and they are trying to scam us out of our paid weeks." I pressed the microphone button, but before I could speak, Rebecca pulled the microphone stand toward her. She had heard enough of her career being diminished by a man who was currently holding forged documents. "Actually, Richard, I am a senior forensic accountant." Rebecca's voice rang out through the speaker, slicing through the humid air. "And as the sole proprietor of R&E Coastal Holdings, I can confirm that we purchased this property in cash 2 years ago. We do not rent it out. We do not use a management company." "That piece of paper you just handed to a police officer is a complete forgery." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. "Rebecca, how dare you speak to your father-in-law that way? You are lying. Ethan told us he was renting this place." "I never told you anything about this house," I corrected my mother through the speaker. "You found the address by snooping through my mail the last time you visited us in Portland. You assumed we were renting because you constantly underestimate us. You assumed you could show up, force your way in, and play the generous host for the entire family. But you made a massive miscalculation." Officer Miller took a step closer to Richard, his hand resting securely on his duty belt. "Sir, presenting forged legal documents to a police officer to gain unlawful entry to a home is a serious offense. You have exactly 1 chance to tell me the truth before I put you in handcuffs." Richard took a step back, bumping into Patricia. The absolute panic in their eyes was something I had never seen before. For 30 years, they had operated on the assumption that their lies would never be challenged by anyone with actual authority. Now, surrounded by 20 angry relatives, 2 police officers, and thousands of people watching on Jasmine's livestream, the reality of their situation was crashing down on them. Rebecca leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Officer Miller, please note this for your official report. I, Rebecca Wilson, the legal owner of this property, am formally issuing a trespass warning to Richard Wilson, Patricia Wilson, Tyler, Wilson Jasmine Wilson, and every single person currently standing on my lawn. You are ordered to leave the premises immediately. If anyone sets foot on my porch again, I want them arrested." The heavy silence that followed Rebecca's declaration was broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the Gulf waves and the sudden sharp squawk of Officer Miller's radio. The oppressive Florida heat, which just moments ago had fueled a collective rage against me, suddenly felt suffocating for entirely different reasons. The 20 extended relatives standing on my front lawn stopped wiping their sweaty foreheads and slowly lowered their luggage. A collective realization washed over the crowd as they pivoted their gaze away from the locked mahogany door and fixed it squarely on Richard and Patricia. Officer Miller took a deliberate step back, resting his hand on his duty belt. "You heard the property owner?" he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The trespass warning has been formally issued. I need everyone to gather their belongings and begin moving back to your vehicles immediately." Before anyone could take a single step toward the SUVs, Aunt Barbara broke from the pack. She dropped her glossy fashion magazine onto the paved walkway, the glossy cover slapping against the hot stone. Her face, previously flushed from the afternoon sun, was now pale with a rapidly dawning comprehension. She marched directly up the porch steps, ignoring the police officers entirely, and stopped inches from Patricia's frozen figure. "Wait a minute," Barbara said, her voice cutting through the thick humidity like a serrated knife. She pointed a trembling finger at the Ring camera, then turned her hand back toward her sister. "If they own it, why did you charge each of our families $2,500 for a luxury rental package?" Patricia flinched, as if she had been physically struck. Her eyes darted wildly from Barbara to the police officers, then down to the crowd of relatives who were now surging forward, their exhaustion instantly replaced by betrayal. "Barbara, please," Patricia stammered, her polished country club articulation completely disintegrating. "Lower your voice. We can discuss the finances later. Ethan and Rebecca are just trying to turn us against each other to distract from their own selfish behavior. You know how they manipulate things." "Do not try to gaslight me, Patricia," Barbara snapped, stepping even closer. "You sent an itemized email to everyone in this family. You explicitly stated that you managed to secure a massive corporate discount on a $2 million beachfront rental because of Richard's business connections. You demanded the money be wired directly to your personal account so you could pay the property management agency up front. I sent you my money 3 weeks ago." Uncle David, who had been quietly dragging a massive Yeti cooler up the driveway, dropped the handle. The heavy plastic cooler slammed into the concrete. "You told us the same thing," he shouted, his face reddening with anger. "You said it was a non-refundable deposit. You told my wife that if we did not wire the money by Friday, we would lose our spot in the master suite." The murmurs in the crowd exploded into open shouting. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began comparing notes, shouting out the exact amounts they had transferred to Patricia and Richard. The carefully curated illusion of the wealthy, generous patriarch and matriarch was evaporating in real time, exposed as a cheap family grift. Richard tried to intervene, puffing out his chest and attempting to project his usual commanding presence. "Now listen here, everyone. This is a private family matter. The money was collected to cover a variety of expenses, including food transportation and incidentals for the entire fortnight. We simply streamlined the process to make it easier for everyone." "Food and incidentals," Uncle David echoed, stepping up to the porch. "We drove our own cars. We bought our own groceries. You specifically categorized that wire transfer as a luxury housing contribution. You scammed your own family, Richard. You brought us to your son's private home, a home he clearly told you not to come to, and you charged us for the privilege." Jasmine, who had been eagerly broadcasting the entire ordeal to her thousands of followers, suddenly realized the disastrous turn of events. Her chat was no longer attacking me for being a toxic brother-in-law. The live comments were flooding the screen, calling her in-laws con artists and scammers. She scrambled to lower her selfie stick, her fingers fumbling over the screen as she frantically tried to end the live stream, but she dropped the device in her panic. The phone hit the wooden porch, the camera lens pointing directly up at Patricia's terrified face, still broadcasting every second of her humiliation to the internet. Tyler bent down to pick up his wife's phone, his face a mask of complete guilt. He refused to make eye contact with any of his aunts or uncles. He knew. It was obvious in the way he shrank away from the crowd. He had known the entire time that this was a scam, and he had happily tagged along for a free ride funded by his extended family. Officer Miller, sensing the situation shifting from a simple civil trespass to a potential criminal fraud investigation, unclipped the microphone on his shoulder. He looked directly at Richard. "Sir, did you solicit and collect funds across state lines under the pretense of renting a property you do not legally own? Because if you did, we are no longer just dealing with a trespassing warning. We are stepping into the territory of wire fraud." Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, the reality of federal charges temporarily paralyzing his tongue. I leaned forward in my office, pressing the microphone button on my desk console. The forensic accounting had taken Rebecca exactly 5 minutes to unravel while we were listening to their shouting match. She had pulled up the public transaction ledgers and matched the dates of Patricia's sudden spending sprees. I cleared my throat, letting the electronic chime of the camera speaker silence the screaming crowd on the lawn. 16 paying adults. I announced, my voice cold, precise, and echoing perfectly across the quiet street. 16 adults charged $2,500 apiece for a fraudulent rental agreement. That is a rather large sum of money to collect for a house you never had the keys to. Patricia squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head as if she could physically block out the sound of my voice. I looked at Rebecca, who gave me a sharp, affirming nod, and I delivered the final blow. "Where did that $40,000 go, Mom?" The sky above Destin darkened in seconds, turning a bruised, metallic purple as the first heavy tropical droplets began to hammer against the pavement. The wind whipped up, pulling at the expensive linen of the relatives' clothes and sending the neatly arranged beach chairs tumbling across the lawn. What was a manageable confrontation just minutes ago suddenly felt like a scene from a disaster movie. 20 people, many of them in delicate high-end vacation wear, scrambled to protect their belongings as the sky opened up. But nobody moved toward their cars. They were paralyzed by the absolute mounting carnage of the situation. Patricia, her mascara starting to run down her cheeks, turned to face the mob. She had always commanded her social circles with a wave of her hand, but her audience was currently staring at her like she was a common thief. "Listen to me," Patricia shrieked over the intensifying roar of the downpour. "This is a misunderstanding. Ethan is a spiteful small man. We collected that money to cover family expenses. You know how expensive it is to transport a family of 20. You all agreed to the convenience fee because you wanted a stress-free luxury experience. Ethan is just being selfish because he hates that he was cut out of the family's core investments." Aunt Barbara was trembling, her mascara also running, but hers was from pure rage. She stood her ground in the driving rain, ignoring the water soaking through her designer blouse. $2,500 per family for transport. Barbara's voice was strained, vibrating with a lethal clarity. "We all drove our own SUVs, Patricia. We paid for our own gas. We paid for our own snacks. There was no transport agency. You collected $40,000 in pure, untaxed profit from your own sisters and brothers." The crowd erupted. The uncles and cousins who had arrived expecting a week of luxury at my expense were now realizing they had been the primary victims of a predatory Ponzi scheme run by their own matriarch. The air filled with shouts of betrayal. Patricia whirled around, her eyes darting between the angry faces surrounding her. She looked like a cornered animal, her entitlement finally buckling under the pressure of 20 people realizing they had been swindled. "Tyler, help me!" she screamed, reaching for her oldest son. Tell them it was necessary. Tell them about the logistics." Tyler stood in the middle of the deluge, his designer sunglasses askew, looking as if he wanted to dissolve into the storm. He puffed out his chest, attempting to channel some of his father's bluster, though his voice lacked any conviction. "You guys are overreacting," Tyler yelled, his hands held up as if to push back the encroaching crowd. "It is just money. Ethan is the one causing this. He is a failure. He got lucky with this house, probably on some shady high-interest loan, and he is trying to make us look like the bad guys because he is jealous that we have actual connections. He has always been the black sheep, the one who couldn't make it in the real world without us constantly checking on him." It was the same old script, the one that had sustained Tyler through decades of unchecked arrogance. But for the first time in his life, the script fell flat. His defense wasn't just pathetic, it was utterly irrelevant. Jasmine, who had been trying to shield her massive diamond-encrusted designer handbag from the torrential rain, finally stopped moving. She stood frozen a few feet from Tyler, her face pale. She had married into this family, believing the lie that they were elite, that Tyler was a visionary, and that Patricia was the benevolent queen of a financial empire. She looked at the soaked, panicked woman screaming about family expenses, then turned her gaze to Tyler, whose only defense was to resort to insulting his brother. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, the confusion slowly morphing into a cold, hard realization. She took a step toward Tyler, her voice low enough that it wasn't immediately picked up by the shouting crowd, but loud enough for the microphone near the door to catch it clearly. "Why does your mother need money?" Jasmine asked, her voice dangerously flat. She was looking at him as if she were seeing him for the first time, realizing the man she had broadcasted to her followers was a hollow shell. "You told me your crypto firm was going public next month. You told me that was why we had to be here to celebrate the IPO." The surrounding relatives went silent, the shouting dying away as everyone waited for Tyler's answer. Tyler looked at his wife, then at the camera, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. I mean, the market has been volatile," Tyler mumbled, his eyes shifting everywhere but at Jasmine. "You know how the exchange works. It is all about timing." Jasmine scoffed a sharp sound of disbelief. "My followers are already commenting on the chat, Tyler. They are pointing out that your firm stopped posting updates 6 months ago. The website is down." Inside my office, I watched the entire disintegration through the monitor. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The house was a fortress, and I was holding the key to their entire charade. I turned the microphone back on, my voice booming across the lawn. "The exchange hasn't been volatile, Tyler," I said, my voice cutting through the rain like a blade. "It ceased to exist last August. You didn't lose the money in the market. You lost it in a gambling ring in South Florida. Mom didn't collect that money for family expenses. She collected it to cover your debt so you wouldn't go to jail." The silence that followed was total. Even the rain seemed to quiet. Patricia's face crumbled, her hands covering her mouth, while Richard just stared at the ground. 20 relatives who had arrived expecting a vacation now stood in the rain, fully aware that they had been used as human piggy banks to keep a failed gambling-addicted brother out of prison. Officer Miller looked at the group, his expression one of tired professional resignation. He turned back to the ring camera, his voice calm. "Mr. Wilson, I think I have heard enough. If these people are not off this lawn in the next 3 minutes, I am going to start citing every single one of them for trespassing. And as for the rental agreement and the wire transfers, that is going to be handled by the fraud unit on Monday morning. I suggest you all start your engines." The relatives didn't wait for a second warning. They turned in unison and scrambled back toward their SUVs, leaving Richard, Patricia, and Tyler standing alone in the rain, stripped of their money, their dignity, and their lies. "Turn that thing off." Tyler lunged forward, his manicured hands grasping blindly at the wet plastic of Jasmine's phone case. Jasmine sidestepped him with the grace of a matador, her expensive heels slipping slightly on the slick, rain-washed porch. She held the phone higher out of his reach, the glowing screen illuminating her furious, mascara-streaked face. "Do not touch me!" She snapped, her voice trembling with a terrifying blend of rage and absolute public humiliation. She glanced down at the screen, reading the rapidly scrolling text from her live stream. The comments were flying by so fast, they were a blur of digital condemnation. "They are pulling public records, Tyler. My followers are dropping links in the chat. Federal bankruptcy filings." Chapter 7. Filed 3 weeks ago. "You told me we were restructuring." Tyler's face drained of what little color the cold rain had left him. The golden boy facade, carefully maintained through decades of parental coddling and financial bailouts, completely melted away. He looked wildly at the camera lens, then at his parents, his chest heaving as panic seized his lungs. "It is just market volatility," he stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of defense. "It is a coordinated smear campaign by rival developers. You know how the industry works, Jasmine. It is just a temporary liquidity crisis." I leaned into the microphone from the dry, quiet safety of my home office. "A temporary liquidity crisis?" I asked, letting my voice ring out over the storm, cold and precise. "Is that what we are calling massive illegal gambling debts now?" Richard's head snapped up. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles bulged against his jawline. Ethan, shut your mouth. You have done enough damage to this family today. Turn off that speaker right now. I have not done anything but tell the truth. I countered the intercom, carrying every syllable perfectly over the torrential downpour. You cannot silence me anymore, Dad. You have no authority here. You are standing on my property, soaking wet, caught in a federal crime. Jasmine stared at the camera again, her eyes widening. What gambling debts, Tyler? What is he talking about? User Crypto King 99 just commented that your firm stopped operating 6 months ago. The SEC raided your partners. Tyler, tell me this is a lie. Tyler stood paralyzed in the deluge, his designer sunglasses askew on his head, looking completely hollowed out. I will tell you, I continued through the speaker. He did not lose that money in the crypto market, Jasmine. The exchange was a sham from day one. When it went under in August, he panicked. He went to Vegas in March and blew through the last of your personal savings trying to win it back. When that failed, he got involved with an underground sports betting ring in South Florida. He is completely bankrupt. He owes dangerous people a lot of money. Patricia, drenched and shivering violently, stepped between her son and Jasmine's camera, raising her hands to shield Tyler's face. Stop filming my son, she shrieked, her country club poise entirely annihilated. Leave him alone. He made a mistake. He was under immense pressure to succeed. Jasmine slowly lowered the phone, her hands shaking from pure revulsion. She looked at Patricia, then at the husband she had bragged about to thousands of strangers. Why does your mother need money? Tyler, Jasmine asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously flat pitch. If you are broke, why is she scamming her own sisters? Because Mom and Dad are broke too, I answered for him. They leveraged the family manufacturing business to the hilt 5 years ago to fund their lifestyle. They are completely cash poor. So when their perfect golden boy came crying about his gambling debts, terrified of going to prison, or worse, they could not just write him a check. They needed quick, untraceable cash. Patricia burst into a fresh round of violent, heavy sobs, her hands clutching her soaked linen blouse. We had to protect our boy, she screamed at the camera, then at the backs of the retreating relatives. You do not understand the pressure he was under. We had to keep the family brand intact. If Tyler goes down, the whole Wilson name goes down. So you stole from your own blood, I said. You needed a glossy brochure to run your scam, so you used my house. You snooped through my mail, found this address, and used my success as bait. You manufactured a fake family reunion, charged 20 people $2,500 each, and funneled that $40,000 directly into Tyler's accounts to pay off a bookie. Tyler puffed out his chest, stepping around his mother in a desperate final attempt to reclaim his dominance. He pointed a trembling finger at the camera above the door. You are a failure, Ethan. You always have been. You got lucky with this real estate, probably on some shady loan your wife co-signed. You have no idea how the real world works. I was going to pay them back. Once my next venture launched, I was going to quietly refund the money. It was just a temporary reallocation of family resources. The sheer audacity of the phrase temporary reallocation seemed to echo over the crashing thunder. It was the exact sterile corporate justification my father had used his entire life to excuse his own greed. Suddenly, heavy footsteps splashed through the deep puddles on the concrete walkway. The relatives who had been retreating to their vehicles had stopped dead in their tracks upon hearing the intercom broadcast. They had heard every single word of Tyler's confession. Aunt Barbara marched back onto the lawn. The polite societal restraint she had maintained for 60 years was entirely gone. Her designer shoes were caked in Florida mud, and her silk blouse was plastered to her skin, but she did not care. She looked like a predator that had just cornered its prey. She ignored Officer Miller, who was watching the scene unfold, with his hand resting cautiously on his radio. She ignored the torrential rain pounding against her shoulders. She walked straight up the porch steps, her eyes locked with laser focus on Tyler and Patricia. A temporary reallocation. Barbara repeated, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register that cut right through the howling wind. She did not stop moving until she was inches from Tyler's chest. Tyler stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Jasmine's discarded designer luggage. Aunt Barbara. Please, you have to understand the market dynamics. Barbara lunged forward. She grabbed the collar of Tyler's expensive rain-soaked polo shirt, her knuckles turning white as she yanked him down to her eye level. I do not care about your market dynamics, Barbara hissed, her voice vibrating with absolute unadulterated fury. I want my $2,500. I want the money you stole from my checking account to pay your gambling debts, and I want it right this second. Patricia lunged forward desperately, trying to pry her sister's hands off her precious son. Barbara let him go. You are assaulting him. We are family. We will figure out a payment plan. A payment plan? Barbara shoved Patricia back with her free hand, her eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. You committed interstate wire fraud, Patricia. You sent a fraudulent digital contract across state lines to solicit funds under false pretenses. That is a federal crime. Barbara tightened her grip on Tyler's shirt, her gaze shifting between the terrified golden boy and his sobbing mother. You have exactly 60 seconds to initiate a wire transfer back into my account, or I am calling the FBI. Barbara did not loosen her grip on Tyler's soaking wet collar. She began counting down from 60, her voice loud and rhythmic, slicing through the torrential downpour. Tyler was hyperventilating, his hands frantically swatting at his aunt's wrists, but Barbara held on with the strength of a woman who had just realized her retirement fund had been raided by her own sister. Patricia was weeping openly now, clawing at Barbara's shoulder, begging her to stop making a scene. The rest of the relatives stood frozen on the lawn, the pouring rain matting their hair to their faces, entirely captivated by the destruction of the Wilson family hierarchy. Then a heavy metallic clack echoed from the front of the house. The heavy mahogany front door, which had remained impenetrable for the last hour, suddenly shifted. The crowd on the lawn fell completely silent, the only sounds being the drumming rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Through the thick, reinforced glass panels framing the door, a figure appeared. It was Rebecca. She stood perfectly still in the warm, ambient light of the foyer, looking out at the chaotic mob on our front lawn. In her arms, resting securely against her chest, was our 2-year-old daughter, Lily. The relatives who had been shouting about breached contracts and ruined vacations suddenly lost their voices. They stared through the rain-slicked glass, their expressions transforming from rage to profound, sickening shame. Lily was fast asleep, completely exhausted from the medications and the strain on her tiny lungs. Covering her pale face was a clear pediatric oxygen mask. A thin, transparent tube trailed down from the mask, connecting to a portable oxygen concentrator, slung securely over Rebecca's shoulder. The machine emitted a faint, rhythmic pulse, a mechanical heartbeat that pumped pure oxygen into our daughter's struggling airway. The visual completely destroyed Patricia's earlier narrative. Just 20 minutes ago, she had stood on this very porch, waving her hand dismissively and telling the entire extended family that Ethan was simply being dramatic over a slight cough. She had painted me as a paranoid, selfish son trying to ruin their vacation over a case of the sniffles. Now confronted with the undeniable reality of a child fighting for her breath behind fortified glass, the sheer malice of Patricia's lie hung in the humid air like poison. Uncle David slowly reached up and pulled his soaked golf hat off his head, clutching it to his chest. Aunt Barbara's counting stopped abruptly. She released Tyler's shirt, letting him stumble backward into the puddles, her eyes locked onto the fragile little girl behind the door. Rebecca reached out and pulled the heavy door open, but only a crack. She left the heavy brass security chain engaged, a physical barrier, keeping the toxic chaos of my family firmly on the outside where it belonged. The cool, air-conditioned air of our foyer met the oppressive Florida humidity. Patricia wiped the running mascara from her eyes and took a tentative step toward the crack in the door. Rebecca. Please, Patricia whimpered, her voice cracking under the weight of her absolute exposure. You have to let us inside. We can explain everything. It is pouring rain out here. We are family. Rebecca's eyes were devoid of any sympathy. She looked at Patricia with the cold, calculating precision of a forensic accountant examining a fraudulent ledger. 4 years ago, you guilted Ethan into mortgaging our first apartment to give Tyler $50,000 for his lavish wedding. Rebecca said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register that easily carried over the storm. You cornered my husband. You cried. You told him he was a nobody who needed to support his incredibly successful, visionary older brother. You said it was his duty to invest in the family brand. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but Rebecca did not yield a single inch. We ate ramen for 2 years, Patricia. I worked double shifts during tax season to dig us out of the massive hole you forced us into, just so Tyler could have a champagne fountain and an ice sculpture at a wedding to a woman he has been lying to since day one. Rebecca's gaze shifted to Tyler, who was currently shivering in the mud, looking entirely broken. You told everyone we were renting this house because admitting we succeeded without your money destroys your entire reality. Now look who is begging in the rain. The crowd of relatives gasped. The revelation of the $50,000 extortion was new information to them. They were suddenly realizing that Tyler's entire lifestyle, his wedding, his car, his supposed success, had been entirely subsidized by the very brother they had been conditioned to look down upon. Jasmine stood a few feet away, her expensive designer bags sinking into the saturated grass. She stared at Tyler in absolute disgust, realizing her fairy tale marriage was built on stolen money and familial abuse. Patricia realized she had lost. The facade was completely obliterated. The wealthy matriarch persona was dead, replaced by the reality of a desperate broke woman facing federal wire fraud charges. She dropped to her knees on the wet concrete of our porch. The dirty rainwater soaked instantly through her expensive linen slacks. She pressed her hands together, looking directly up at the security camera mounted above Rebecca's head. "Ethan, I know you are listening!" Patricia screamed, her voice tearing with genuine panic. "I know you are in there." "Please," I watched her through the monitor on my desk. For the first time in 34 years, my mother was not giving me an order. She was pleading. "Ethan, we have absolutely nothing left." Patricia sobbed, the rain washing away the last traces of her makeup. "Tyler owes horrible people a lot of money. They are going to hurt him. They are going to take everything. Aunt Barbara is going to call the FBI, Ethan. They will put your brother in federal prison. They will put me in prison." She crawled closer to the crack in the door, entirely abandoning any remaining shred of dignity. "You have the money, Ethan," Patricia wailed, staring into the camera lens with wild, terrified eyes. "You own this house free and clear. You can afford it. Just transfer the $40,000 back to the relatives. Pay them back right now. Please. Just wire the funds so your brother does not go to jail." I released the intercom button on my desk console and stood up. The heavy, soundproofed walls of my home office completely blocked out the howling wind and the torrential rain, creating a surreal sense of calm. I walked down the hallway toward the foyer, the hardwood floors cool beneath my feet. Rebecca was still standing by the reinforced glass, holding Lily securely against her chest. Our daughter's chest rose and fell in a steady, assisted rhythm, the mechanical purr of the portable oxygen concentrator drowning out the muffled shouting outside. I placed a hand gently on Rebecca's shoulder. She turned, her eyes flashing with a fierce protective fire, and took a step back, allowing me to take her place. I grabbed the heavy brass handle, disengaged the security chain, and pulled the front door open just wide enough to stand in the frame. The immediate blast of hot, humid air and driving rain washed over me, but I did not flinch. I looked down at my mother. Patricia was still on her knees in the middle of a muddy puddle on the concrete walkway. Her expensive linen outfit was plastered to her skin, ruined and stained with dirt. Her perfectly styled hair hung in wet, stringy clumps around her face. The relatives she had commanded for decades stood in a wide semicircle behind her, watching her humiliation with cold, unforgiving eyes. When she saw me step into the doorway, Patricia's face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. She scrambled forward, her manicured hands gripping the bottom rung of the porch railing as she hoisted herself up. "Ethan, thank God," Patricia choked out, her voice raw and grating over the sound of the storm. "You have to help us. You have to save your brother. These people are insane. Barbara is actually threatening to call the federal authorities over a simple family misunderstanding." I stared at her. I felt absolutely nothing. For 34 years, this woman's disapproval had shaped my every decision, fueled my deepest insecurities, and dictated my self-worth. But looking at her now, stripping away the lies and the country club arrogance, I only saw a pathetic, manipulative fraud. "It is not a misunderstanding, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You explicitly committed wire fraud. You stole from your sisters and brothers to pay off Tyler's bookie." Patricia reached a shaking hand out toward me, the rain streaming down her arm. "But you can fix this. You make so much money at that tech firm, Ethan. We know about your salary. We know about your stock options. You bought this massive compound in cash. $40,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Just transfer the funds back to Barbara and David. Bail us out just this once." I let out a short, hollow laugh that seemed to echo off the porch columns. "Just this once," I repeated, leaning against the doorframe. "You manipulated me into taking out a second mortgage to pay for his wedding. You stole my college fund to buy him a luxury car. You forged a rental agreement to break into my home for a free vacation. And now you want me to reward you for stealing $40,000 from our relatives by paying it back for you." Patricia dropped her hand, her eyes widening in sheer panic as she realized the old guilt trips were bouncing off a brick wall. "Ethan, he is your brother. He will go to prison. Those loan sharks will kill him. Please, I am begging you. Be the bigger person." "No," I said flatly. The single syllable hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, bumping into Richard, who had remained entirely silent, his eyes glued to his wet loafers. A few feet away, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Jasmine had completely abandoned her husband. She was aggressively hauling her designer luggage through the mud, dragging it toward a waiting rideshare vehicle that had just pulled up to the curb. She did not even glance back at Tyler as she slammed the trunk shut. Tyler, meanwhile, was frantically swiping at his phone. The screen was covered in raindrops and his fingers were shaking so violently he could barely unlock it. He was backed against the hood of his rented SUV, trapped between Aunt Barbara's furious glare and Officer Miller's watchful stance. "Aunt Barbara." "Just wait 1 second," Tyler stammered frantically, wiping the phone screen against his wet shirt. "I have emergency liquidity. I have an offshore crypto wallet that the federal bankruptcy courts do not know about. I will wire you the $2,500 right now. Just back off and let me log in." Barbara crossed her arms, the rain beating down on her face. "Do it!" she demanded, her voice like cracking ice. "Right now! Show me the transfer confirmation, Tyler, or the next call I make is to the fraud division." Tyler tapped the screen, his eyes manic as the app loaded. He held his breath, waiting for the dashboard to populate. Suddenly, the color completely drained from his face. His jaw went slack, his mouth dropping open in a silent scream. He tapped the screen again, harder this time, his thumb hammering against the glass. He refreshed the page. He closed the app and opened it again. He hit the side of the phone against his palm. "No," Tyler whispered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "No, no, no. That is impossible." He stared at the screen for another agonizing second before his head snapped up. His eyes locked onto me, standing in the dry comfort of my doorway. The panic in his eyes instantly morphed into a feral, rabid fury. He lunged away from the SUV, charging through the deep puddles toward my front porch. Officer Miller immediately stepped forward, pressing a heavy, unyielding hand firmly into the center of Tyler's chest, stopping his momentum entirely. "You," Tyler screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me over the police officer's shoulder. "You did this? You hacked my accounts?" The relatives murmured, confused by the sudden accusation. Patricia whipped her head around, staring at her golden boy in horror. Tyler thrashed against Officer Miller's arm, spitting rain and vitriol. "He wiped me out." Tyler roared, his voice cracking under the strain. "My offshore wallet is empty. Every single account is at zero. He is a senior software engineer. He cyber-attacked my secure servers. Arrest him. He just stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from me." I stood perfectly still, watching the golden child completely unravel into a screaming, destitute mess on my front lawn. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I just let a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. "I didn't hack you, Tyler," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the storm. "I just did my job." Tyler wiped the rain from his eyes, his face contorted in a mixture of confusion and panic. "Your job," he spat, his voice cracking. You are a mid-level IT guy. You fix spreadsheets. You do not have the clearance to touch my offshore accounts. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning comfortably against the doorframe while the storm raged around them. That is the story Mom and Dad like to tell at their country club dinners, I said smoothly. It was easier for them to dismiss my career as fixing computers than to admit they had absolutely no idea what I actually do. I am a senior data scientist for the Risk and Fraud Division at Chase Bank. I do not fix spreadsheets, Tyler. I write the algorithms that detect international money laundering and wire fraud. A collective gasp rippled through the relatives standing on the lawn. Aunt Barbara's eyes darted from me to Tyler, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. Tyler took a step back, his expensive shoes slipping in the mud. The defiance in his posture completely evaporated, replaced by the shaky, hollow stance of a man who just realized he had walked directly into a trap. 3 days ago, I continued pitching my voice to cut cleanly through the sound of the rain. I was sitting right here in my home office. I was reviewing a batch of high-priority security flags generated by the exact automated defense system I helped design. The system monitors uncharacteristic spending patterns, large unverified transfers, and interactions with blacklisted international entities. At 9 in the morning on Tuesday, an alert flashed across my monitor regarding a sudden, highly irregular wire transfer. Patricia let out a sharp, strangled sob. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with terror as she stared up at me from her knees. The transfer was for exactly $40,000, I stated, locking eyes with my mother. It originated from a joint checking account belonging to Patricia and Richard Wilson. It was flagged immediately because the destination was not a standard domestic bank. It was routing through a shell corporation registered in the Bahamas, specifically destined for an unregulated offshore crypto wallet. Tyler shook his head frantically, holding his hands up as if he could physically push my words back into my mouth. "You had no right," he stammered. "That is a privacy violation. You illegally accessed our mother's financial records." "I did not access anything manually." "Tyler," I replied, my tone completely clinical. "You are not that special. You were caught by an automated script. The system flagged the transfer because that specific offshore wallet was already sitting on a federal watch list. It is directly tied to an illegal sports betting syndicate operating out of South Florida. When a flagged transaction originates from a user with my own last name, standard compliance protocol requires it to be routed to my department for immediate manual review to prevent internal conflicts of interest. It landed right in my queue. Richard finally looked up from the wet concrete. His face was pale, his jaw trembling. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire legacy burn to the ground. "Ethan," Richard croaked, his voice lacking any of its usual booming authority. "Ethan, please. You know how these banking systems work. You have the access. Just reverse the transaction. Clear the flag. Let the money bounce back to our account and we will refund Barbara and the others right now. We will handle Tyler's debts ourselves. Just unfreeze it." I looked at the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I lacked the vision to succeed in the real world. I looked at the mother who had repeatedly called my career a disappointment. I looked at the brother who had mocked my home, stolen my parents' money, and attempted to use my property as a stage for his elaborate con. I shook my head slowly. "You still do not understand how the real world works, Dad," I said. "I am not a customer service representative. I do not have a magic button that reverses illegal wire transfers made to offshore gambling syndicates. When an algorithm catches $40,000 moving from a suburban checking account to a blacklisted criminal enterprise, it is no longer a family matter. It is a federal incident." Tyler let out a primal, agonizing scream. He slammed his fists onto the hood of his rented SUV, the metallic thud echoing over the thunder. "My money," he shrieked, turning back to face me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Where is my money, Ethan? If it did not go through to the wallet, where is it? The bookies are going to kill me. They gave me until Friday." Patricia scrambled forward on her hands and knees, grabbing the edge of my jeans with her muddy fingers. "Ethan," she wailed, tears and rain mixing on her ruined face. "Where did you send the money? Give it back to him. You are his brother. You have to save him." I looked down at her muddy fingers clutching my clothes. I did not step away. I wanted her to feel the absolute immovability of my stance. I smiled, the expression cold and devoid of any familial warmth. "I didn't hack you, Tyler," I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And I certainly did not keep your money. When I saw the destination of that $40,000, I just did my job. I verified the fraudulent nature of the recipient wallet, and I clicked the button that reads Freeze Assets and Report to Federal Authorities." Tyler's knees buckled. He slid down the side of his rented vehicle, splashing into the mud, his hands gripping his hair in absolute despair. "Your money is not floating in cyberspace, Tyler," I concluded. "It is gone. It is locked in a government holding account seized by the Treasury Department. And very soon they are going to want to know exactly why you and your parents were trying to fund an illegal gambling ring." The word "seized by the Treasury Department" hung in the humid air, heavier than the torrential rain beating down on the concrete walkway. For a fraction of a second, the entire front lawn was perfectly still. Even the thunder seemed to pause as the reality of my statement sank in. Then Tyler completely snapped. The last remaining thread of his carefully constructed golden boy sanity violently ruptured. A guttural, animalistic roar tore from his throat. It was not a word, just a horrifying sound of pure, unadulterated rage and absolute desperation. He shoved himself off the side of his rented SUV, his expensive leather shoes slipping and sliding in the thick Florida mud. He did not care. He lowered his head and charged directly at the front door, his hands curled into white-knuckled fists. "I will kill you!" Tyler screamed, spit and rainwater flying from his lips. "I will rip your throat out, Ethan! Give me my money back!" He did not make it within 10 feet of the porch. Officer Miller, who had been standing by with the tense readiness of a coiled spring, moved with terrifying professional efficiency. He stepped directly into Tyler's path, dropping his center of gravity. As Tyler blindly lunged forward, Miller grabbed him by the shoulder of his soaked designer polo shirt, twisted his momentum, and slammed him face first into the saturated earth. The impact was accompanied by a sickening squelch. Tyler thrashed wildly in the deep, wet mud, kicking his legs and screaming obscenities, entirely abandoning his polished corporate persona. He looked like a cornered beast, snapping his jaws at the heavy boots holding him down. "Get off me!" he shrieked, spitting a mouthful of wet grass and dirt. "He is the criminal. He stole my liquidity. Arrest him. He is ruining my life." "Stop resisting!" Officer Miller barked, pressing his knee firmly between Tyler's shoulder blades. "Keep your hands flat on the ground or I will deploy my taser. Do it now." Patricia shrieked, a high, piercing sound that cut right through the crashing storm. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, her ruined linen outfit completely coated in thick brown sludge, reaching frantically for the police officer. "Let him go!" she wailed, clawing at the empty air, her voice shredding her vocal cords. "You are hurting him. He is a victim. My son is a victim. He is a good boy." Richard finally moved. He lunged forward and grabbed Patricia by the waist, dragging her backward before she could interfere with a police officer, making a physical arrest. Patricia fought him, thrashing and sobbing, her heels digging useless trenches in the lawn. Richard simply wrapped his arms tightly around her, his own face a mask of complete hollow defeat. He knew exactly what was happening. The long game was finally over. There were no more loans to co-sign, no more businesses to leverage, no more lies to spin. Aunt Barbara stood just a few feet away, entirely unfazed by the pouring rain pasting her hair to her face. She watched her nephew getting his face pushed into the mud with an expression of cold, vindictive satisfaction. She did not offer a single word of comfort to her sobbing sister. The rest of the extended family stood in a paralyzed ring around the yard, 20 people who had each paid $2,500 for a fake family reunion, now bearing witness to the spectacular implosion of the Wilson family brand. On the ground, Officer Miller wrenched Tyler's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed over the sound of the rain. Tyler gasped, his manicured hands pinned awkwardly against his lower back, his chest heaving against the wet ground. The fight instantly drained out of him, leaving only shaking, pathetic sobs. Officer Miller reached for the radio mounted on his shoulder, keeping his knee firmly planted on Tyler's spine. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I have one adult male detained, requesting backup to my location and run a priority check on a Tyler Wilson. The radio crackled with a loud burst of static. Copy that, Unit 4. Running the name now. Stand by. The entire lawn waited in agonizing suspense. Tyler had stopped thrashing, allowing the rain to pound against the back of his head. He looked like a crushed, defeated animal, his cheek resting in a puddle of muddy water. 10 seconds later, the radio crackled again. The dispatcher's voice was crisp, entirely devoid of emotion, and loud enough for everyone standing on the lawn to hear perfectly. Unit 4, be advised. Your subject has an active no-bail federal warrant out of the Southern District of Florida. The charges are interstate wire fraud conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The warrant was issued by the FBI Cyber Crimes Division less than 2 hours ago. Proceed with extreme caution. The words hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. Wire fraud, money laundering, the FBI. Patricia stopped fighting Richard's grip. Her knees buckled entirely and she sank against her husband, letting out a low, mournful wail that sounded like a dying siren. Richard just stood there, holding his sobbing wife, staring blankly at the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser parked in the street. Tyler Wilson. Officer Miller said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy, as he hauled the soaking wet, mud-covered man to his feet. You are under arrest on a federal warrant for wire fraud and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Tyler hung his head. His expensive designer clothes ruined his face, smeared with thick brown dirt and grass. He looked nothing like the wealthy visionary entrepreneur my parents had worshipped for 3 decades. He looked exactly like what he was, a cheap, desperate con artist who had finally run out of runway. I stood in the doorway, perfectly dry, watching the scene unfold with absolute detachment. I did not smile. I did not gloat. The truth was enough. Across the lawn, standing near the curb, Jasmine had not moved a single inch. Her designer luggage was stacked haphazardly near the open trunk of her waiting rideshare, but she was entirely frozen. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped her smartphone so tightly, her knuckles were white. The phone was still mounted on its portable ring light stand. The red recording icon was still pulsing steadily in the upper corner of the screen. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. The live stream had never disconnected. She had not pressed pause when the shouting started. She had not ended the broadcast when Aunt Barbara demanded her money. She had been too paralyzed by the rapid-fire destruction of her life to remember her digital audience. Now she watched the chat box scrolling at a dizzying, frantic speed. Thousands of her dedicated followers, the people who worshipped her, curated wealthy lifestyle, had just watched her husband get tackled into the mud by law enforcement. They had heard the exact federal charges broadcast over the police radio. User Lux Lifestyle commented, "OMG. Did he just get arrested?" User Crypto King 99 chimed in, "I told you the SEC raided his firm." User Glamour Babe added, "He was literally stealing from his own family trash." User Gossip Girl 888 wrote, "Wire fraud. Jasmine girl, pack your bags. You are broke." User Real Estate Pro finished with, "They are seizing all his assets. The feds do not play around." Jasmine's breath hitched. Her carefully constructed brand, the lucrative lifestyle sponsorships, the flawless image of the wealthy jet-setting power couple was permanently annihilated. It was not just a private family dispute. It was a massive public humiliation broadcast live to the exact people she relied on for validation and income. She slowly lowered the phone, her hands trembling violently. She looked up from the scrolling text of her digital ruin and stared directly at Tyler. Her husband was standing in the pouring rain, his hands cuffed behind his back, covered in mud, weeping openly as Officer Miller patted him down. The illusion was dead. The scam was over. And the entire world was watching. Tyler looked up through the driving rain. The thick mud coating his face made his tears leave pale, jagged streaks down his cheeks. He spotted Jasmine standing frozen by the curb. His eyes widened with a sudden, desperate flicker of hope. He thought his wife, his partner in the meticulously curated luxury lifestyle facade, would be the one to save him. He thought she would use her network, her resources, and her undeniable influence to pull him out of the fire. Jasmine. Tyler screamed, his voice raw and cracking over the rumble of thunder. Jasmine, baby, please get my phone. Call Davis. Call the legal team right now. Tell them I need a federal defense attorney. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding. Jasmine did not take a single step toward him. She did not flinch. Her manicured fingers remained tightly clamped around her smartphone, her eyes locked on the relentless cascade of comments rolling across her screen. The chat was a merciless high-speed firing squad. Her sponsors were likely dropping her in real time. The flawless, wealthy brand she had meticulously cultivated over 5 years was dissolving into the Florida mud right alongside her husband's dignity. Jasmine, please, Tyler thrashed against Officer Miller's iron grip, desperate to reach her. I need you. We can fix this. Tell them to wire the retainer. We have emergency funds in the Cayman accounts. Jasmine finally looked up. She stared at the man she had married. She did not see a husband in trouble. She saw a sinking ship, a catastrophic public relations disaster, and a one-way ticket to a federal indictment. She was not about to let him drag her down into the dark waters of asset seizure and prison time. A cold, absolute survival instinct washed over her face. She blinked, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, calculated self-preservation. Without acknowledging his frantic pleas, Jasmine marched across the wet grass. She bypassed Tyler entirely, not even sparing him a downward glance. She walked straight toward a large, hard-sided cooler that someone had abandoned near the edge of my porch during the initial chaos of the reunion. She wiped the pooling rainwater off the top of the cooler with her bare hand and firmly planted her portable ring light stand onto the plastic surface. Tyler stopped struggling. He stared at her, utterly bewildered, rain streaming into his eyes. Jasmine, he choked out his voice, dropping to a confused, pathetic whimper. What are you doing? Called Davis. Why are you setting up your camera? Jasmine adjusted the angle of her phone. She smoothed her damp hair back from her face, took a deep, steadying breath, and forced a look of profound, shattered devastation onto her features. When she spoke, her voice was projected clearly, aimed directly at the microphone, completely ignoring the man handcuffed in the mud behind her. To all my followers, Jasmine began, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical vulnerability. I am coming to you live right now because I believe in total transparency. You guys have been with me through everything. You are my community, and right now, my heart is completely broken. Tyler's jaw dropped. He twisted his neck, straining against Officer Miller's knee, staring at her in absolute horror as he realized what was happening. Jasmine, are you talking to your followers? I am being arrested by the FBI. Put the phone down and call my lawyer. I am standing here in absolute shock. Jasmine continued, her eyes brimming with unshed tears that she expertly held back for the camera lens. What you are witnessing behind me is just as horrifying to me as it is to you. I have just learned right along with the rest of the world that the man I married is not who he claimed to be. I am devastated to discover that Tyler has been involved in severe illegal financial activities. Liar! Tyler roared, his voice tearing through the storm, his vocal cords shredding with the force of his scream. You knew everything. You helped me set it up. You spent the money. You wore the diamonds. You flew first class on the funds. You knew. Jasmine pressed a hand to her chest, her face a portrait of innocent, betrayed grief. She pitched her voice slightly louder to drown out his screaming. I had absolutely no knowledge of his business dealings, his offshore accounts, or his fraudulent activities. He lied to me every single day. He manipulated me. He used our marriage and my brand as a shield for his crimes. I am a victim of his horrific deception, just like his poor family. Patricia, who was still slumped against Richard, suddenly snapped out of her shock. She pointed a shaking finger at Jasmine, her face contorting with fresh fury. How dare you? Patricia shrieked over the rain. How dare you abandon my son? You gold-digging parasite. You spent his money faster than he could steal it. Jasmine completely ignored Patricia, keeping her tearful gaze locked on her smartphone. I cannot in good conscience remain tied to someone who operates with such a lack of integrity, she said to her audience, her tone shifting to one of empowered, independent resolve. I stand for honesty. I stand for ethical business. Therefore, effective immediately, I am separating from Tyler Wilson. I will be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning, and I am fully prepared to cooperate with federal authorities to prove my absolute innocence in this matter. No. Tyler sobbed, his entire body shaking violently against the wet earth. You cannot do this to me. Not now, Jasmine. I gave you everything. Thank you all for your support during this horrific trauma, Jasmine concluded, reaching forward. I am going to take some time offline to heal. Please respect my privacy. She tapped the screen, ending the broadcast. The moment the recording stopped, the shattered, vulnerable facade vanished instantly. Her face returned to a mask of cold, unyielding stone. She dismantled the ring light, shoved it roughly into her designer handbag, and turned on her heel. Jasmine, Tyler begged, his voice a pathetic, broken plea. Please, I am your husband. Do not leave me here. Jasmine paused. She turned her head, looking over her shoulder at the man kneeling in the mud. You are a liability, Tyler, she said, her voice dropping the theatrical warmth she used for her followers. It was flat, transactional, and ruthlessly clear. And I do not do liabilities. Call your own lawyer. A sleek black premium rideshare SUV pulled up to the curb, its tires splashing through the deep puddles. Jasmine marched over to her stack of Louis Vuitton luggage. She did not ask the driver for help. She hauled the heavy designer bags into the open trunk herself, her movements frantic, panicked, and efficient. Tyler watched her, his chest heaving, the rain washing the mud and tears down his face. You will go down with me, he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail of absolute betrayal. I will tell the feds everything. I will give them your private accounts. You signed the tax returns, Jasmine. You will wear orange, too. I swear to God, I will drag you down with me. Jasmine slammed the trunk shut with a heavy thud. She opened the passenger door and stepped into the dry, climate-controlled interior of the luxury SUV. She did not look back. She pulled the door shut cleanly, cutting off the sound of Tyler's screaming. The driver put the vehicle into gear, and the black SUV smoothly pulled away from the curb, accelerating down the rain-swept street until its red taillights disappeared completely into the storm. Tyler collapsed forward, his forehead resting against the wet grass, letting out a sound of pure, unbroken agony. He had lost the money. He had lost his freedom. And now his perfect partner in crime had thrown him directly under the bus to save her own skin. I watched the black SUV vanish down the block, leaning comfortably against my doorframe. It was a brutal display of self-preservation, but I could not say I was surprised. A marriage built on fraud, stolen money, and social media metrics was destined to shatter the second the cash stopped flowing. I turned my attention back to the lawn, where the cold, hard reality of federal prison was finally settling over the golden child. The red taillights of Jasmine's luxury rideshare faded into the driving rain, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in their wake. The only sounds remaining were the relentless crash of thunder and the pathetic, wet sobbing of my brother, who was now fully pressed into the mud, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. He had lost his stolen money. He had lost his freedom. And his carefully chosen partner in crime had just publicly amputated him to save her own brand. Patricia watched the car disappear with wide, unblinking eyes. For a moment, she looked entirely empty, as if the reality of the situation had short-circuited her brain. Her golden child was being hauled to his feet by Officer Miller, read his Miranda rights, and marched toward the back of a waiting police cruiser. Her daughter-in-law had defected. Her husband Richard stood completely frozen, offering absolutely nothing in the way of a solution. He just stared at his ruined Italian loafers. Then Patricia snapped. Her head whipped around, her manic gaze locking onto me where I stood on my dry, elevated porch. The sheer terror in her eyes instantly morphed into a frantic, desperate rage. She shoved away from Richard, stumbling over her own feet as she charged across the flooded lawn toward my front steps. Ethan, she shrieked, her voice cracking violently over the storm. You have to stop this. Tell that officer it is a mistake. You work for the bank. You can fix this. I did not move a single muscle. I looked down at her as she gripped the wet brass railing of my porch, her knuckles white, her expensive linen outfit plastered to her skin and ruined by thick brown mud. "I cannot fix federal wire fraud." "Patricia?" I said, my voice dangerously calm, easily cutting through the sound of the rain. "I detected it. The FBI is fixing it." Patricia let out a guttural scream of frustration. She slammed her hand against the wooden post. "You vindictive, selfish little boy!" she roared, tears streaming down her face. "How can you do this to your own flesh and blood? I am your mother. I gave you life. I fed you. I clothed you. I put a roof over your head. You owe me your entire existence, and you stand there acting like you are better than us. You are going to use your money to hire your brother, the best defense attorney in the country. Do you hear me? You owe this family." The sheer audacity of her delusion hung in the humid air. The 20 relatives gathered on my lawn who had been watching Tyler's arrest in stunned silence now turned their attention completely to us. Aunt Barbara crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she watched Patricia try to play the ultimate maternal trump card. I let out a short, hollow laugh. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a sound of absolute finality. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was looking directly down into her manic, tear-streaked face. "You gave me life," I repeated, pitching my voice so every single person on that lawn could hear exactly what I was saying. "You put a roof over my head. Let us be very clear about my childhood, Patricia. You provided the bare legal minimum required to not get arrested for child neglect. You did not raise me. I raised myself." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off, my tone dropping to a sharp, icy edge that demanded absolute silence. "I paid my own way through a state college," I continued, pointing a finger down at her. "I worked 50-hour weeks on the graveyard shift at a warehouse. I ate cheap ramen noodles and slept in my car between classes just to afford my textbooks. And do you remember what you and Richard were doing while I was doing that? You were at the dealership paying cash for a brand new Porsche 911 for Tyler's high school graduation present." Patricia flinched, physically recoiling as if I had struck her. She looked around frantically, realizing that Aunt Barbara, Uncle David, and the rest of the family were hanging on my every word. "You co-signed Tyler's luxury apartment in the city," I said, taking another step forward. "You funded his failed startup. You paid off his gambling debts. You mortgaged your own home to pay for his lavish destination wedding to a woman who just abandoned him in the mud. You never once asked if I was hungry or tired or if I needed help paying my rent. You treated me like a convenient ghost, someone you only remembered when you needed a punching bag to make Tyler look better by comparison." "Ethan." "Please," Richard finally croaked, taking a weak step forward. "Do not do this in front of everyone. We did the best we could." "You did the best you could for him," I corrected, glaring at my father. "But the truth is, neither of you are parents. You never were. You are just the managers of a failing PR firm, and Tyler was your star client. You spent 30 years curating his image, hiding his failures, and funding his scams, just so you could brag to your country club friends. And now your star client just got canceled, your firm is bankrupt, and your brand is destroyed. I owe you absolutely nothing." Patricia buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The manipulative fire had completely died out, leaving behind a broken, terrified woman who had finally run out of lies. At that exact moment, a second police cruiser pulled up to the curb, its siren wailing briefly before cutting off. 2 more officers stepped out into the rain. Officer Miller, who had just finished securing a weeping Tyler in the back of his vehicle, walked over to the newly arrived officers. He spoke to them quietly for a moment, gesturing toward Patricia, Richard, and the large group of soaking wet relatives standing on the grass. Officer Miller nodded, then turned and walked directly toward the center of my lawn. He raised his hand, commanding the attention of the crowd. "Listen up, folks," Officer Miller shouted over the storm. His voice was firm, authoritative, and completely devoid of nonsense. "We have just confirmed a federal warrant for wire fraud and money laundering regarding the individual in my vehicle. Furthermore, we have probable cause to believe that the $40,000 stolen to fund his illegal activities was taken directly from a joint account managed by his parents." Aunt Barbara's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto Patricia and Richard with the intensity of a predator spotting a wounded animal. Now I understand this was supposed to be a family event. Officer Miller continued gesturing to the decorations and the catering tables that were slowly sinking into the mud. But I was also informed that many of you paid a substantial entry fee to be here today, and that others were actively defrauded out of large sums of money under false pretenses. The relatives began to murmur, their shock rapidly transforming into a collective righteous fury. Uncle David stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. If any of you gave money to Patricia or Richard Wilson, Officer Miller announced, his voice echoing off the surrounding houses, you need to step forward right now. The federal government is freezing all of their known assets as part of the ongoing investigation. If you ever want to see a single dime of your money again, you need to file official police reports against Patricia and Richard Wilson immediately. We have squad cars on the way to take your statements. The silence that followed lasted only a second. Aunt Barbara was the first to move. She marched directly toward Patricia, who was still cowering near my porch steps. The rest of the relatives surged forward right behind her, a unified front of angry, soaking wet people who had finally realized they had been played for fools. I stepped back inside my house out of the rain and prepared to watch my parents reap exactly what they had sown. Aunt Barbara did not walk. She marched. The heavy rain plastered her gray hair to her skull, but she looked completely unaffected by the torrential storm. She closed the distance between herself and Patricia with the terrifying singular focus of a heat-seeking missile. Behind her, Uncle David, Cousin Sarah, and a dozen other relatives surged forward, abandoning the scattered, sinking catering tables to form a tight, angry barricade around my parents. Patricia scrambled backward, her heels slipping in the wet grass until her spine hit the wooden lattice of my porch skirting. She held up her mud-stained hands, her eyes wide with a manic-cornered panic. Barbara, please? Patricia stammered, her voice shaking violently. You have to understand the bigger picture. We were just borrowing it. Tyler was going to pay everyone back with massive interest. It was a temporary bridge loan for his tech venture. It was an investment in family. A bridge loan. Aunt Barbara spat the words out like toxic venom, stopping inches from my mother's face. You stole $80,000 from my retirement account, Patricia. You sat at my dining room table drinking my wine and cried real tears about how Tyler was on the verge of a breakthrough but needed capital to clear a temporary regulatory hurdle. You swore on our mother's grave that the principal was guaranteed by Richard's firm. Uncle David pushed his way to the front, his face flushed red with absolute fury. And you took $50,000 from Sarah's college fund, Richard. You sat in my living room and told me it was a guaranteed real estate trust. You looked me in the eye and said, family takes care of family. My daughter is working double shifts at a diner to pay for her textbooks right now, while you bought your golden boy a brand new Porsche and funded his ridiculous destination wedding. Officer Miller and the two newly arrived police officers opened the trunks of their cruisers. They pulled out thick stacks of official complaint forms, completely ignoring the torrential downpour. If you have financial records, wire transfer receipts, or email correspondence proving you transferred funds to the Wilsons under false pretenses, please note it on the form, Officer Miller instructed, his voice booming over the thunder. We need exact dollar amounts, dates, and the specific accounts the money was wired to. Do it now before the federal freeze fully locks down the offshore routing trails. The relatives did not hesitate for a single second. They swarmed the police cruisers, using the wet hoods of the cars as makeshift desks. The flashing blue and red emergency lights illuminated their furious, determined faces. They shielded the paperwork from the driving rain, with their jackets pressing their pens into the sodden paper with absolute vindictive purpose. I watched from the dry sanctuary of my porch as the grand, untouchable Wilson family empire was rapidly reduced to a stack of wet police reports filled out on the hood of a Ford Explorer. Every single relative they had scammed, manipulated, and looked down upon was now actively signing away my parents' freedom. Richard finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. For 30 years, my father had ruled our family and his social circle through pure, unadulterated financial intimidation. He was the man who commanded the head of the table at the country club, who silenced dissenting opinions by picking up the expensive check, and who used his perceived wealth as a weapon to demand absolute respect. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon that old, overbearing patriarch persona to regain control of the narrative. "Everyone stop this instantly!" Richard bellowed, taking a step toward the police cruisers. "I am the head of this family. You will not file police reports against us like common street criminals. We are the Wilsons. I demand you put those pens down and let me handle this internally. I will liquidate assets tomorrow morning and make everyone whole." Nobody stopped writing. Nobody even flinched. "Listen to me," Richard shouted, marching up to Uncle David and aggressively grabbing his shoulder. David put the paper down. "We can negotiate this right now. I will give you equity in the firm." Uncle David violently shoved Richard's hand away. The force of the push made Richard stumble backward, his leather shoes slipping in the mud. "Do not touch me," David growled, stepping right into Richard's personal space. "You are not a CEO, Richard. You are not a visionary. You are a cheap con man wearing a leased suit. For years you mocked me at Thanksgiving dinners for driving a used car. You treated the rest of us like garbage because we worked honest jobs while you paraded around in your fake luxury. But you bought that luxury with our money. You are nothing but an old man caught in a pathetic lie. You have no money, you have no power, and you are going to federal prison." Richard's jaw dropped. The illusion shattered completely. The authoritative, untouchable patriarch vanished entirely, leaving behind a small, terrified man shivering in the rain. He looked around the lawn, making eye contact with the relatives he had belittled for decades. Cousin Sarah sneered at him with pure disgust. Aunt Barbara did not even look up from her police report. They were not afraid of him anymore. His fake wealth was gone, and without it, he was entirely powerless. Patricia let out a high, panicked squeak. The reality of the situation had finally bypassed her profound delusions. The FBI had Tyler. Jasmine had fled. The entire extended family was currently filing federal fraud statements with uniformed police officers. The authorities were going to freeze their bank accounts, seize their home, and inevitably put them in handcuffs. "Richard." Patricia gasped, grabbing his sleeve, her fingernails digging into his soaked jacket. "Richard, we have to go. We have to leave right now. We need to get to the airport." Richard snapped his head toward the street. Their leased luxury SUV was parked just behind the police cruisers, the keys still in his pocket. He nodded frantically. "Move," he ordered. Richard grabbed Patricia by the wrist. They abandoned any pretense of dignity or innocence. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer another excuse. They put their heads down and practically sprinted across the flooded lawn. Patricia lost one of her expensive heels in the deep mud, but she did not stop to retrieve it. She ran barefoot through the puddles, her ruined linen outfit clinging to her shaking frame as they pushed past their furious relatives. "Hey," Aunt Barbara shouted, pointing at them. "They are running, officer. They are leaving." Officer Miller looked up from his clipboard. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I highly suggest you remain on the premises until we have collected these statements. Running will only compound your charges." Richard ignored the command entirely. He shoved Patricia into the passenger seat of their SUV and sprinted around to the driver's side. He yanked the door open, threw himself behind the wheel, and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life with a desperate, heavy rev. He threw the transmission into drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. He was going to run. He was going to try and access whatever hidden offshore funds he had left before the feds could freeze the routing numbers. Richard slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The heavy SUV lurched forward, its tires spinning wildly on the wet asphalt before catching traction. He jerked the steering wheel, aiming the vehicle toward the street exit, desperate to bypass the police cruisers blocking the center lane. He made it exactly 10 feet. Before the SUV could clear the driveway, a massive, unmarked black Chevrolet Tahoe roared around the corner. It did not slow down. It accelerated aggressively, cutting a sharp diagonal angle through the torrential rain, and violently slammed on its brakes, completely barricading the exit. Richard slammed on his own brakes, the SUV skidding on the wet pavement, stopping mere inches from the heavy steel bumper of the black Tahoe. The dark-tinted doors of the unmarked vehicle swung open simultaneously. 4 people wearing dark rain jackets with bold yellow letters printed across the back stepped out into the storm. The bold yellow letters printed across the backs of their dark windbreakers spelled out 3 characters that struck absolute terror into the hearts of anyone hiding dirty money: IRS. Specifically, they were agents from the Criminal Investigation Division. 2 lead agents, a tall man with a shaved head and a sharp-featured woman holding a thick waterproof briefcase, walked deliberately through the blinding headlights of the Tahoe. The other 2 agents fanned out in the rain, securing the perimeter of the driveway to ensure there was absolutely no avenue for escape. Officer Miller, who was still standing on the lawn collecting frantic police reports from our furious relatives, gave the lead federal agents a curt professional nod of acknowledgement. This was not a coincidence. This was a highly coordinated, meticulously timed federal trap, and my front yard was ground zero. Richard frantically pounded his fist against the steering wheel of the luxury SUV. He rolled down his window, the driving rain immediately blowing into the pristine leather interior and soaking his panic-stricken face. "Move your vehicle!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, hysterical edge. "You are blocking a private driveway. I have a medical emergency. My wife needs to leave right now." The lead agent did not even break his stride. He walked straight up to the driver's side of the SUV, entirely unfazed by the screaming man or the torrential downpour. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold badge, pressing it flat against the wet glass of Richard's window. "Richard Wilson," the agent said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight of absolute crushing authority that cut right through the booming thunder. "I am Special Agent Vance with the Internal Revenue Service. Turn the engine off and step out of the vehicle immediately." Richard swallowed hard. His eyes darted from the gold badge to the agent's unyielding face. "I am a retired corporate attorney," Richard bluffed, clinging desperately to the rotting remnants of his power and influence. "I know my rights. You have no jurisdiction to detain me without a warrant. I am simply trying to take my wife home." Agent Vance did not argue. He did not blink. He leaned closer to the window, the rain pouring off the brim of his hood. "Turn off the engine, Richard, or I will have my deputies break the glass and extract you physically. Do it now." Richard's hands shook violently. The engine cut off. He slowly opened the door and stepped out into the pouring rain, his ruined designer suit dripping mud onto the driveway. Patricia remained frozen in the passenger seat, her hands pressed flat against the dashboard, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the federal agents surround their vehicle. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, trying to straighten his posture, trying to look like the wealthy, untouchable patriarch he had pretended to be all his life. "My son's legal issues have nothing to do with my personal finances. Tyler operates an independent firm. I am completely separate from his business dealings." The female agent stepped forward, unzipping her waterproof briefcase. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents protected by a clear plastic sleeve. She held them up so the glow of the red and blue police lights illuminated the unmistakable bank letterheads and routing numbers. "That would be a solid defense, Mr. Wilson," she said smoothly, "if you had not actively co-signed every single one of his fraudulent commercial loans." Richard flinched. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in the flashing lights. "We have been tracking the offshore shell companies Tyler set up in the Caymans for over 18 months, Agent Vance explained, crossing his arms over his chest. "Tyler was the architect of the scam, but you were the guarantor. You used your established credit history and your supposed pristine reputation to secure the capital he needed to run his Ponzi scheme. You signed the guarantee documents for his fictitious tech ventures over lunch at your country club. We have the security footage, Richard. We have the wire transfers. You actively facilitated a multi-million-dollar tax evasion ring." "I did not know what he was doing," Richard shouted, taking a step back, his voice pitching into a panicked whine. "Tyler told me it was a tax optimization strategy. He said it was a temporary bridge loan to clear international regulatory hurdles. He lied to me." "You are a former corporate lawyer with 40 years of experience, Richard." The female agent countered her tone, dripping with absolute disbelief. You knew exactly what you were signing. You knew Tyler had no viable product. You willfully ignored the red flags because you were skimming a 20% management fee right off the top of every single fraudulent transfer. You were funding your luxury lifestyle with stolen money and avoiding federal taxes on every cent. Patricia slowly opened the passenger door and stepped out into the rain. She looked like a drowned rat, her bare foot sliding in a muddy puddle on the asphalt. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "Richard, tell them they are wrong. Tell them we are going home to Connecticut. Tell them we have the estate. We are protected." Agent Vance turned his attention to Patricia. His expression remained entirely stony. "Mrs. Wilson," Agent Vance said, "I am afraid you are not going back to Connecticut." Patricia blinked, the rain washing away the last traces of her makeup. "What are you talking about?" "Of course we are going home. Our primary residence is in Fairfield. We own it free and clear. It is in my name." "You did," the female agent corrected, "until Richard used the Fairfield estate as the primary collateral for Tyler's final massive commercial loan. A loan that Tyler defaulted on 3 weeks ago. When the federal authorities traced the fraudulent funds back to that specific property, it triggered an immediate asset forfeiture protocol." Richard let out a choked, desperate gasp. He leaned heavily against the side of the SUV, his knees buckling slightly under his own weight. As of 1 hour ago, Agent Vance announced, his voice projecting so the entire crowd of scammed relatives standing on the lawn could hear the final nail being driven into the coffin. "The Internal Revenue Service, in coordination with the FBI, has executed a full federal seizure of the Fairfield estate. The locks have been changed. The gates are padlocked. Federal agents are currently boxing up everything inside the house to be cataloged and sold at public auction to pay back the victims of this massive tax fraud." Patricia let out a sound that did not even sound human. It was a high, keening wail of absolute world-shattering despair. She lunged forward and grabbed Richard's shoulders, shaking him violently. "Our house!" Patricia shrieked, her fingers clawing at his wet jacket. "Richard, our house, my jewelry, my clothes, my antique furniture. Tell them they cannot take my house. Where are we supposed to live? Richard, do something. Fix this." Richard did not say a single word. He could not. The illusion he had spent his entire life building, the fake wealth, the arrogant superiority, the flawless golden family brand, was entirely gone. He stared blindly down at his shaking hands. The heavy electronic key fob for their luxury SUV was gripped between his fingers. It was the only asset he had left, and even that was a leased vehicle they could no longer afford to keep. Patricia's screaming faded into white noise. Richard's mind simply broke. The crushing weight of his lies finally snapped his carefully constructed reality in half. His fingers went completely limp. The keys slipped from his hand, falling through the pouring rain, and landed with a wet, heavy thud in the deep mud. He had absolutely nothing left, and nowhere to go. The heavy splash of Richard's keys hitting the mud was the final sound of their empire collapsing. Agent Vance did not even blink. He signaled to one of the deputies, who stepped forward and kicked the keys away from Richard's feet before securing them in an evidence bag. The second agent was already slapping a bright orange seizure notice onto the windshield of the luxury SUV. Richard stood completely catatonic. The driving rain soaked his thinning hair, but he did not move to wipe the water from his eyes. His jaw hung slack. The man who had spent 3 decades terrorizing boardrooms and belittling his own flesh and blood had simply ceased to function. Patricia stared at her husband, waiting for him to do something, anything to fix the nightmare. She waited for him to scream at the federal agents, to pull out his phone and call a powerful judge, to magically produce a briefcase full of cash. He did nothing. He just stared blankly at the orange sticker on the windshield. A low, animalistic whimper escaped Patricia's throat. She finally understood. There were no hidden accounts. There were no secret favors to call in. The money was gone. The house was gone. Tyler was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, facing decades in federal prison. Jasmine had abandoned them. Their entire social circle, represented by the furious relatives currently filling out police reports on the lawn, wanted them behind bars. Patricia spun around. Her frantic mascara-stained eyes scanned the yard, darting past the flashing red and blue lights, past the disgusted faces of Aunt Barbara and Uncle David, until they locked directly onto me. I was still standing on my porch, perfectly dry under the awning, watching the destruction of the Wilson family brand with absolute detachment. Patricia let out a desperate, tearing sob. She pushed herself away from the seized SUV and began to stumble toward my house. She was missing a shoe, her bare foot slapping against the freezing mud, her expensive linen outfit plastered to her skin like a wet rag. She looked nothing like the arrogant, impeccably groomed matriarch who had arrived at my home hours earlier to show off her fake wealth. She looked entirely broken. "Ethan!" Patricia cried out, her voice cracking over a clap of thunder. She reached the bottom of my wooden stairs and grabbed the handrail, dragging her soaked body up the steps. "Ethan!" Please, I did not step back, but I did not step forward to help her either. I stood like a statue, my arms crossed over my chest, watching her fall to her knees on the top step of my porch. Patricia crawled forward, leaving muddy handprints on the clean wooden floorboards. She reached out her trembling fingers, wrapping around the hem of my jeans. "Please, Ethan," she begged, looking up at me with a face twisted by sheer terror. "You have to let us in, just for tonight. Just for a few weeks until we can figure this out. We have nowhere to go." They took the house. They took the cars. Our credit cards are frozen. We do not have a single dollar to our names. You have the guest room. You have the couch. I will sleep on the floor. Please, you are my son. I looked down at the woman clutching my leg. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. The emotional hold she had wielded over me for my entire life had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, impenetrable clarity. "You want to sleep in my guest room?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft, slicing right through her hysterical sobbing. "You want to sleep on the floor of my house?" "Yes!" Patricia gasped, nodding frantically, fresh tears carving paths through the dirt on her cheeks. "Just until Richard calls his partners. Just until we can clear this up. We are family, Ethan. Family helps family." I reached down, gripped her wrists, and firmly peeled her hands off my jeans. I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to look up at me. "Family helps family." I repeated, testing the words on my tongue, as if they were a foreign language. "That is a fascinating concept coming from you, Patricia. Let us talk about family help. Do you remember my sophomore year of college? The year the state grants were delayed, and I was going to be evicted from my tiny, roach-infested studio apartment." Patricia blinked her eyes, darting nervously. "Ethan, this is not the time to bring up the past. We are in an emergency." I ignored her entirely. "I called you," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I begged you for a loan, just $600 to keep a roof over my head so I could finish my midterms. Do you remember what you told me?" Patricia swallowed hard, shrinking back against the wooden porch railing. "You told me that adults solve their own problems," I said, quoting her exact words from a decade ago. "You told me that bailing me out would ruin my work ethic. And then less than a week later, you posted photos from your first-class flight to Paris. You bought Tyler a Rolex for passing a single marketing class while I was sleeping in the back seat of my Honda Civic in the campus parking lot. I did not know it was that bad," Patricia wailed, pressing her hands to her face. "Richard handled the finances. I thought you were just being dramatic. You knew exactly how bad it was." I fired back, my voice finally rising, echoing with years of suppressed anger. "You knew I was freezing in that car. You knew I was eating out of food pantries. You did not care because I was not Tyler. I was not the golden child. I was the embarrassment who refused to play along with your pathetic country club charade. Ethan, please, I gave birth to you." Patricia shrieked, lunging forward to grab my shoes. "Blood is thicker than water. You cannot leave your own mother out in the freezing rain to be arrested. You have a duty to me." Down on the lawn, the police officers had finished collecting the initial statements from the relatives. Aunt Barbara marched up to the edge of the porch, the rain pouring off her jacket. She looked at Patricia, groveling on the floorboards, then looked up at me. "Do not let her in, Ethan." Aunt Barbara said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. She will drain whatever you have left and blame you for her downfall. Patricia turned her head and snarled at her own sister like a cornered animal. Shut up, Barbara. This is between me and my son. He loves me. He will not abandon me. I looked from Aunt Barbara back down to the pathetic, shivering woman at my feet. Patricia was still clinging to the delusion that she held some kind of maternal authority, that the title of mother somehow erased 30 years of emotional abuse, neglect, and financial sabotage. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house keys. I am not abandoning you, Patricia, I said, my voice dropping back to a quiet, absolute calm. I am simply matching your energy. For 30 years, you made it explicitly clear that my presence was an inconvenience. You curated a perfect family portrait and intentionally cropped me out. Patricia stared at me, her chest heaving, realizing that her ultimate begging was failing. Her grip on my shoes loosened. I turned my back to her and inserted my key into the deadbolt of my front door. You told me there was not enough space for me in this family, I said, pushing the door open to reveal the warm, dry, perfectly secure home I had built entirely by myself. You were right. I stepped inside, closed the heavy wooden door, and threw the deadbolt, leaving her in the dark and the rain. The heavy oak door shuddered violently under the frantic wet slapping of Patricia's hands. She hammered her fists against the solid wood, her screams muffled by the driving rain and the thick, soundproof insulation of my home. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers and the unmarked federal vehicles parked on my lawn painted distorted, chaotic shadows through the frosted glass of the sidelights. I stood in the foyer for a long moment, listening to the pathetic, rhythmic thumping of her desperation. Behind me, a warm hand rested gently on my shoulder. I turned my head to see Rebecca standing in the soft, golden light of the hallway. She did not say a word, nor did she try to stop me. Her presence was the quiet, unwavering anchor I had relied on for the past 5 years. She was the family I had chosen when my biological one had discarded me. I gave her a small, reassuring nod, then reached out, gripped the cold brass handle, and pulled the front door wide open. Patricia practically fell forward across the threshold, her hands grasping desperately for the doorframe. She stopped dead when she saw the look in my eyes. She was expecting anger, fury, or perhaps a lingering shred of familial obligation. But anger requires an emotional investment. What she saw in my eyes was absolute chilling emptiness. You want to invoke family loyalty, Patricia? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise of the torrential storm with clinical surgical precision. Let us talk about family. Family is supposed to be a foundation, a safety net. But you and Richard spent 30 years weaving a net exclusively for Tyler, using threads you shamelessly stole from every single person standing on this lawn. Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but the cold finality in my tone silenced her instantly. Every single choice you made brought you to this exact moment on my porch. I continued, stepping firmly into the threshold so she could not advance a single inch further. You chose to ignore the glaring red flags of Tyler's fraudulent businesses because his dirty cash flow allowed you to buy your way into the country club's inner circle. You chose to willfully co-sign his illegal offshore accounts because you craved the status of a multimillionaire without doing a single day of the actual grueling work required to earn it. You chose to look the other way while he robbed Aunt Barbara of her hard-earned retirement, while he drained Cousin Sarah's college tuition, and while he financially gutted your own siblings. I looked past her, making eye contact with Richard. He was still standing completely paralyzed in the pouring rain, his muddy hands empty, the federal agents watching his every move with cold, unyielding vigilance. And while you were doing all of that to them, you chose to erase me, I said, bringing my focus back down to Patricia's mud-streaked face. You told your friends I was just a difficult child going through a rebellious phase. You told your neighbors I was ungrateful for the life you supposedly provided. Do you remember my college graduation, Patricia? You did not even bother to show up. You sent me a 2-line text message saying you and Richard were too busy touring a private vineyard in Napa Valley to make the flight. You told me to go celebrate with my friends and figure the rest out. Patricia was sobbing openly now, shaking her head frantically from side to side. Rainwater and ruined makeup streamed down her cheeks, pooling in the collar of her soaked designer blouse. I am sorry. We were blind. We made a mistake. We will change, Ethan. I swear on my life we will change. You are not sorry you did it, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. You are just terrified because you finally ran out of victims. There is no one left to scam. There is no one left to manipulate with fake charm and leased luxury cars. The IRS has your house. The FBI has your golden child. And your pristine reputation is bleeding out into the mud of my front yard for everyone to see. I took a deliberate step back, aligning myself perfectly with Rebecca in the warm, dry entryway of my home. You are looking at me expecting a rescue, but you spent 3 decades making absolutely sure I knew I owed you nothing. So I am giving you exactly what you gave me when I was sleeping in my car and eating cheap ramen noodles. I looked down at her one last time. You have your cell phones. Call an Uber. Figure it out. Patricia let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She reached out her muddy fingers, clawing at the empty air, desperately trying to find a handhold, a lifeline, a shred of the sun she had systematically destroyed over a lifetime of neglect. I did not flinch. I did not offer my hand. I simply stared down at her, delivering the final, inescapable truth. You told me there wasn't enough space for me in this family. I said, my words dropping like anvils onto the porch. You were right. I turned my back to the storm, to the flashing emergency lights, and to the shattered ruins of the Wilson family empire. I walked back into the warm, illuminated sanctuary of my home. I wrapped my arms securely around Rebecca's waist, pulling her close against my side. We did not look back. We did not need to. Behind us, the heavy oak door caught the momentum of the automated smart hinge. It swung shut with a smooth, relentless finality, cutting off Patricia's screaming mid-breath. A second later, the electronic lock engaged. It clicked with a loud, definitive echoing beep, locking the toxic family out in the storm forever. The electronic beep of the deadbolt echoed through the foyer, a sharp, piercing sound that finalized the division between my peaceful life and the wreckage of theirs. The torrential storm raged outside for another 2 days, washing the thick brown mud and the remnants of the ruined catering tables off my front lawn. The physical debris was easily cleared away by a landscaping crew, but the true devastating storm had only just begun for the Wilson family. Fast forward exactly 3 months. The dust had completely settled into a stark, unforgiving reality. Tyler traded his custom-tailored Italian suits and imported silk ties for an oversized, intensely itchy orange jumpsuit. The golden child was currently residing in a federal holding facility, stripped of his hair products, his expensive watches, and his arrogant smirk. He sat in a sterile, windowless consultation room under the harsh glare of flickering fluorescent lights. Across the dented metal table sat a severely overworked public defender who looked entirely unimpressed by Tyler's lingering attempts at charm. Tyler leaned forward, his hands shackled to a waist chain, frantically begging his lawyer to secure a plea deal with the federal prosecutors. He promised to reveal hidden offshore accounts, to turn state's evidence on his shadowy tech contacts, and to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence in a minimum security white-collar prison. The public defender simply shook his head and slid a single piece of paper across the metal table. The prosecutors had aggressively rejected the offer. They did not need Tyler to flip on anyone. Aunt Barbara, Uncle David, and the rest of the defrauded relatives had provided a mountain of meticulous, irrefutable financial records. The FBI already had every single routing number, every fake corporate charter, and every fraudulent email. Tyler had absolutely nothing of value left to trade. He was facing a maximum sentence for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Tyler buried his face in his shackled hands, finally realizing his golden privilege had completely expired. Far away from the dreary, claustrophobic walls of the federal holding facility, Jasmine was thriving in a wash of bright, artificial ring lighting. She sat in a newly leased minimalist luxury apartment in Los Angeles, staring directly into the camera lens of her smartphone. She had legally and surgically severed herself from the Wilson family filing for a rapid annulment the exact morning after Tyler was thrown into the back of the police cruiser. Now Jasmine was spinning a highly lucrative narrative for her 2 million online followers. She had completely rebranded her entire social media presence. She wiped every single photograph of Tyler, Richard, and Patricia from her feed. In their place, she uploaded dramatically lit, tearful videos about her harrowing, courageous escape. She officially declared herself a brave survivor of a financial narcissist. In her daily uploads, she detailed how she had been tragically manipulated by a con artist family, aggressively claiming she had absolutely no idea that her designer bags and lavish vacations were funded by stolen money. She monetized her supposed trauma, flawlessly securing massive brand deals for wellness retreats and organic self-care products. She threw Tyler completely under the bus, abandoning the man she had sworn to love just weeks prior, leaving him to face his federal charges entirely alone, while she used his destruction to drastically boost her engagement metrics. But the most profound, staggering plunge from grace belonged exclusively to Richard and Patricia. Stripped of their stolen Fairfield estate, their frozen bank accounts, and their seized luxury vehicles, they were violently expelled from their Connecticut high society. The IRS had auctioned off every antique piece of furniture, every diamond necklace, and every single tailored suit to begin paying back the massive tax debt. 3 months after crawling on my wet porch and begging for sanctuary, my parents found themselves in a cramped, rust-stained trailer park on the desolate outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. The gravel driveway was littered with overgrown weeds and broken glass. Richard stood in the humid, oppressive Midwestern heat. His shoulders were severely slumped, his posture defeated. He was wearing a faded promotional polo shirt that hung loosely on his rapidly shrinking frame. He grunted with exertion as he pulled a black plastic trash bag out of the trunk of a beat-up 20-year-old sedan they had purchased with the last few $100s they could legally scrape together. There were no country club lunches here. There were no PR firms to manage. They were surviving solely on their meager, heavily garnished monthly Social Security checks. Patricia sat on the peeling vinyl steps of the rusted single-wide trailer. She stared blankly at the corrugated metal siding of the neighboring unit, swatting weakly at a swarm of mosquitoes. She held a cheap plastic prepaid cell phone in her dirty hands. The screen remained entirely dark. She had tried calling Aunt Barbara. She had tried calling Uncle David. She had tried calling Cousin Sarah and every single former friend in her pristine Connecticut contact list. Every single number went straight to a disconnected tone or a blocked line notification. The entire extended family had unanimously cut them out, executing a swift, merciless excommunication. They were entirely isolated, trapped in a decaying tin box in Ohio, left to live out the remainder of their miserable lives with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own choices. The blinding, unfiltered brilliance of the Florida sun beat down on the emerald waters of the Gulf of Mexico, casting a scattering of diamonds across the gentle morning waves. The air tasted of warm salt and blooming jasmine, a stark, deliberate contrast to the freezing mud and torrential rain that had washed away the Wilson family legacy 3 months prior. I stood on the expansive, weathered teak deck of our Destin beach house, leaning my forearms against the sturdy wooden railing. The suffocating weight I had carried for 30 years had completely evaporated, replaced by the rhythmic, soothing sound of the tide. Down on the private stretch of sugar-white sand, Lily was a blur of boundless energy in her bright yellow swimsuit. She sprinted ahead of the incoming surf, her bare feet kicking up sprays of wet sand, her breathless laughter echoing up to the balcony. Watching her run, her chest rising and falling with effortless ease, sent a profound wave of gratitude through my core. Just weeks before the collapse of my parents' empire, Lily had been hospitalized with severe bilateral pneumonia. She had spent 5 terrifying days hooked to a network of monitors and oxygen tubes, fighting for every single breath. During that agonizing week in the pediatric intensive care unit, Patricia had not sent a single text message to ask about her granddaughter. Richard had called exactly once, bypassing any mention of Lily's condition entirely, to frantically demand that I co-sign a high-interest bridge loan to cover the retainer for Tyler's federal defense attorney. The rhythmic mechanical wheezing of my daughter's ventilator had been clearly audible in the background of that call, yet my father had only cared about securing capital for his golden child. That was the exact moment the emotional deadbolt had slid firmly into place, long before the physical door had ever swung shut in their faces. Now Lily was healthy, vibrant, and entirely safe. She knelt in the wet sand, carefully inspecting a translucent seashell before tossing it into her plastic bucket. I turned my head to look at Rebecca. She was curled comfortably in a plush wicker lounge chair, her legs tucked beneath a light linen throw, a condensation-beaded glass of iced tea resting loosely in her hand. The morning light caught the subtle gold highlights in her hair. For the first time in the 5 years we had been together, the perpetual rigid knot of tension that always sat tight between her shoulder blades was completely gone. For half a decade, Patricia had treated Rebecca like an inconvenient stain on the pristine Wilson family portrait. My mother had subjected her to an endless barrage of passive-aggressive interrogations about her middle-class upbringing, her career in public education, and her refusal to conform to their country club aesthetics. Rebecca had endured every thinly veiled insult with remarkable quiet grace, always putting my feelings above her own discomfort. But today, looking out over the private beach we owned free and clear, Rebecca was the undisputed queen of her own sanctuary. The toxic, suffocating influence of her former in-laws had been surgically excised from our daily existence. The past 90 days had been an absolute revelation. We did not wake up dreading the inevitable phone calls demanding bailouts. We did not spend our evenings managing the collateral damage of Tyler's reckless, fraudulent schemes. We simply woke up, made breakfast, did our work, and actually lived our lives. My design firm had secured 3 major new contracts, unburdened by the constant draining distraction of my biological family's manufactured crises. We were thriving, completely insulated from the radioactive fallout of their public destruction. I picked up my mug of black coffee from the glass-topped patio table, taking a slow, appreciative sip. The silence was not empty. It was full, rich, and deeply satisfying. It was the sound of a generational curse finally being broken. Then the absolute tranquility of the morning was abruptly punctured. A sharp, aggressive vibration rattled against the glass tabletop. My smartphone resting next to my coffee mug lit up with an incoming message. I set my mug down and reached for the device. The screen displayed an unsaved number, but the area code registered immediately in my mind. 937, Dayton, Ohio. The exact geographic location of the rusted, dilapidated trailer park where the remnants of the Wilson Empire had been unceremoniously dumped. I stared at the glowing notification banner, my thumb hovering an inch above the glass screen. The preview text was brief, desperate, and unmistakably familiar. Ethan, it is Mom. We have nothing. The words sat there, a digital ghost reaching out from a self-inflicted purgatory. 6 months ago, a message like that would have triggered a visceral spike of anxiety, a deeply ingrained Pavlovian response to swoop in, empty my savings, and rescue them from their own staggering incompetence. I would have felt the crushing, suffocating guilt of the unloved child, desperately trying to buy his mother's basic affection. But as I read the words now, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no anger, no obligation. The emotional void was absolute and impenetrable. Patricia was not reaching out because she missed her son. She was not reaching out to ask if Lily's lungs had finally cleared. She was reaching out because the Ohio heat was oppressive, the Social Security check had already run out, and she needed a new host to drain. I did not open the message. I did not type out a vindictive reply to remind her of how she had treated Lily, or how she had dismissed Rebecca, or how she had abandoned me. I simply pressed my thumb against the screen, swiped left, and selected the block caller option. The phone asked for confirmation. I tapped yes. The screen went dark, reflecting only the bright, cloudless sky above. I slipped the silent phone into my pocket, walked down the wooden stairs to the beach, and stepped onto the warm, welcoming sand to join my actual family. The screen of my phone dimmed, turning black under the glare of the Florida sun, but the words of Patricia's message remained suspended in my mind for a fleeting fraction of a second. "Ethan, it is Mom. We have nothing." I stood perfectly still on the wooden deck, waiting for the familiar, deeply conditioned response to hit me. For 30 years, any communication from Patricia was precisely designed to trigger an immediate visceral reaction, a sudden spike of cortisol, a wave of profound guilt, or a desperate scrambling urge to fix whatever crisis she had deliberately engineered. I waited for the anger to rise, anticipating the righteous indignation of a son who had been discarded, eager to gloat over his abuser's pathetic downfall. I waited to feel the tragedy of her situation, the sorrow of a child realizing his parents were utterly destitute. But as the seconds ticked by, accompanied only by the rhythmic, soothing crash of the Gulf waves, I realized I felt none of those things. The emotional well was completely dry. There was no anger. There was no lingering guilt. There was not even a microscopic trace of sadness. I felt an absolute, profound, and impenetrable indifference. The woman shivering in a dilapidated trailer in Ohio was a complete stranger to me. She was a ghost from a past life that I had successfully and permanently exorcised. I unlocked the screen one final time. I did not open the message thread. I did not type out a blistering response detailing her hypocrisy or reminding her of the thousands of times she had left me with absolutely nothing. Engaging in any capacity would mean she still had a sliver of power, a tiny emotional hook left in my jaw. Instead, I tapped the options menu, selected the block caller option, and confirmed the action. The contact vanished. I deleted the entire thread, erasing the final digital tether connecting me to the Wilson family. I walked over to the woven beach bag resting on the patio chair and casually tossed the phone inside. It landed with a soft, muffled thud against a rolled-up beach towel. The device that had once been a conduit for their endless toxic demands was now just a piece of plastic and glass, silenced and powerless. I turned my back to the house and walked down the wooden stairs, my bare feet sinking into the pristine sugar-white sand. The midday sun was a warm, heavy blanket on my shoulders, baking away the last lingering chill of my previous life. Every step I took toward the water felt lighter, as if a massive physical chain dragging behind me had finally been severed. Down by the shoreline, Lily was entirely engrossed in her vital work. She had abandoned her plastic bucket and was now furiously digging a moat around a lopsided sandcastle, her bright yellow swimsuit speckled with wet brown sand. The sound of her uninhibited, joyous laughter carried over the ocean breeze. It was a sound completely devoid of anxiety or fear. She would never know the conditional, transactional love that had defined my own childhood. She would never be forced to compete for basic affection or be treated as a disposable prop in someone else's narcissistic stage play. "Daddy, look!" Lily shrieked, spotting my approach. She scrambled to her feet, holding up a remarkably intact spiraled conch shell like a hard-won trophy. I broke into a light jog, closing the distance between us. I scooped her up into my arms, spinning her around as she giggled wildly, her small sandy hands clutching my shoulders tightly. The sheer weight of her in my arms, the smell of sunscreen and ocean salt on her skin, anchored me perfectly in the present moment. I looked over her small shoulder and saw Rebecca walking down the shoreline toward us. She had left her lounge chair, the coastal wind playing with her hair, a serene, breathtaking smile lighting up her face. She stopped beside us, wrapping her arms around both me and Lily, resting her head against my chest. This was it. This was my entire world, beautifully contained within the span of my arms. As I held my wife and daughter against the backdrop of the endless emerald horizon, a powerful, shattering realization washed over me. For months, I had thought the ultimate justice was watching the Wilson family empire collapse. I had believed that seeing Tyler stripped of his arrogance and locked in a federal holding facility was the grand victory. I had assumed that knowing Richard and Patricia were trapped in a cramped, sweltering trailer park, entirely abandoned by the high society they worshipped, would be the final satisfying payoff. But I was entirely wrong. Their suffering, their financial ruin, and their brutal public humiliation were just the natural, unavoidable consequences of their own toxic choices. They were the inevitable result of a house built entirely on lies, greed, and the ruthless exploitation of everyone around them. Their destruction was their own doing, and it had absolutely nothing to do with me. The true revenge had nothing to do with their downfall. The sweetest, most absolute revenge was realizing the magnificent fortress I had built for myself. I had constructed a beautiful, secure, and impenetrable life out of the rubble they had left me with. I had found a love that was fiercely protective, a career that was genuinely fulfilling, and a family that was rooted in unshakable loyalty. The ultimate victory was not that my abusers were suffering in the dark, it was that I was standing in the light completely unaffected by their existence. I had built a paradise of peace, and they would never ever have the privilege of accessing it again. I kissed the top of Lily's head, leaned in to kiss my wife, and turned my face toward the ocean, letting the warm, salty breeze carry the last remnants of the past away forever. The most profound lesson from Ethan's journey is that true victory over a toxic family isn't found in their downfall or suffering. Real closure is achieving absolute indifference. For years, Ethan was burdened by the conditional love and manipulation of his parents. Yet when faced with their ultimate ruin, he realized his power lay not in anger, but in the peaceful, impenetrable life he built with Rebecca and Lily. Walking away without guilt is the ultimate liberation. Protecting your peace is always worth it. Have you ever had to establish strict boundaries to protect your mental health? Share your experience and comment below.